Good morning. Today is Tuesday, October 15th at 9:00 a.m. Notice the time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by publicizing same in the Omaha World Herald, OPPD outlets newsletter, OPPD.com, and social media, by displaying such notice on the arcade level of Energy Plaza, and by emailing such notice to each of the district's directors on October 11th, 2024. A copy of the proposed agenda for this meeting has been maintained on a current basis and is readily available for public inspection in the office of the district's corporate secretary. Additionally, a copy of the Open Meetings Act is available for inspection on OPPD.com and in this meeting room. Thank you all for joining us. As a reminder to those joining via WebEx, please mute your microphone to reduce background noise. To members of the public, thank you for attending. You are in listen-only mode. If you have any technology questions, please use the chat feature in WebEx to communicate with the event host. Our agenda for today's meeting is as follows. We will conduct a closed session this morning to discuss one topic, customer growth update. We will conclude this morning's closed session no later than 9:50 a.m. in order to open the WebEx meeting to allow the public and OPPD staff to join. We will begin public session at approximately 10:00 a.m. and receive reports from each committee. Director Howard, do we have a motion to go into closed session?
I move that the board go into closed session at this time, 9:01 a.m. to discuss one topic, customer growth update. With respect to the customer growth update, a closed session is necessary because the discussion will involve competitively sensitive customer information. This motion needs a second.
So, second.
Director Bodner?
Yes. Director Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Director Core?
Yes.
Director Howard?
Yes.
Director Mulhall?
Yes.
Thank you.
Wow.
Director Moody?
Yes.
Director Spurgeon?
Yes.
Director Williams?
Yes, the motion to go into closed session has passed. This closed session will be limited to discussion regarding one topic, customer growth update. No votes or other board action will be taken. A motion and a second is required to reconvene an open session.
So moved. Second. Director Bodner? Yes. Director Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Director Core?
Yes.
Director Howard? Yes. Director Mulhall?
Yes.
Director Moody?
Yes.
Director Spurgeon?
Yes.
Director Williams?
Yes. Motion to come out of closed session at 10:22 a.m. is carried. This closed session was limited to discussion regarding one topic, customer growth update. No votes or other board action was taken. Notice of the time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by publicizing same in the Omaha World Herald, OPPD outlets newsletter, OPPD.com, and social media, by displaying such notice on the arcade level of Energy Plaza, and by emailing such notice to each of the district's directors on October 11th, 2024. Thank you all for joining us. As a reminder to those joining via WebEx, please mute your microphone to reduce background noise. To members of the public, thank you for attending. You are in listen-only mode. If you have any technology questions, please use the chat feature in WebEx to communicate with the event host. We will take public comments at the end of today's meeting, as well as at the board meeting on Thursday, October 17th, which will be conducted in person at the Omaha Douglas Civic Center and begin at 5:00 p.m. The public may attend in person or remotely via WebEx by going to OPPD.com. Joining me today in person are my fellow board members, Amanda Bodner, Mike Kavanaugh, Matt Core, Sarah Howard, Craig Moody, and Mary Spurgeon. Director Janice Mulhall is participating virtually via WebEx. We also have members of our executive leadership team, Steve Bruckner, our general counsel with the Fraser Stryker Law Firm, and OPPD staff. Additionally, we currently have 25 attendees in the meeting virtually, consisting of OPPD employees and members of the public. Today, we will hear the following committee reports. The Governance Committee report from Director Moloff, the Finance Committee report from Director Spurgeon, the Customer and Public Engagement report from Director Howard, and the Systems Management and Nuclear Oversight Committee report from Director Moody. Javier Fernandez will now give the safety briefing.
Thank you, Chair Williams. Do we have anyone from?
Maybe.
Can you do a quick safety briefing here in the room?
Just because of safety.
From here.
You can do it from here.
Morning.
Microphones.
Part of the physical security side of the house in this facility. Exits are out the door here to the right or to the left. We can also go out the back door around which we need to. Not expecting any severe weather. Not to worry about this. We do have the supplies here. AEDs right out the door at the desk. We have additional medical supplies. Slips, trips, and falls continue to be a leading cause of injury. So please be careful and watch your path. Getting into the cold season, starting to use our heaters. It's a good time to check the batteries in your fire detectors and your carbon monoxide detector. With that, Mr. Fernandez, thank you.
Thank you, Randy. One other reminder on the active shooter and active threat. It's a point that we typically remind people of, and I think it's always important for us to remind of that threat. the world is changing and we're in election seasons and wars and emotions are high. And I think it's always important for us to take a step back, breathe, think about what is your plan? Would ever any unfortunate circumstance like that ever happen? If you ever have a physical threat, whether it's an armed threat or not, know what route would you use to exit? You go out with your families to a restaurant. I've now started to practice that. I've actually done that a while ago, but most recently I'm reminded of what would we do if we were ever faced with an active shooter or a physical threat? What route would you take to exit the building? We always talk about this run, hide, or fight. Make sure you know where would you run to, what route would you use? If you had to hide, where would you hide? And if you had to fight, what would you use to fight? Throw or on the psychological safety side of things, we talk about healthy conflict. There will be conflict. Conflict is part of life. As part of the beauty of diversity is that it comes with diverse points of views and that usually brings conflict. The work that we do is very complicated. Maintaining reliability, affordability, sustainability, and a bunch of other goals, it's complicated. And a lot of times those interests conflict with each other. And I think it's normal for us to have conflict. It's important for us to acknowledge that there will be conflict, and we'll have healthy ways for us to balance the conflicts that may arise in front of us. Always knowing that the person behind it has good intentions, right? And we bring conflicts that can be solved and will be solved by collaboration. Safety focus for October, fatigue, mindful of fatigue as we enter the fall and winter months. I'm very happy to report that as we speak, our crews, about 20 OPPD employees, are finally making their way back to Omaha. They should be home later today after spending almost 2 weeks or about 2 weeks out helping with the two hurricanes, Helene and Milton, first in Virginia and then later on in Florida. They're finally making their way back. They're fatigued. Just like everybody else who stayed behind and had to pick up extra work. So fatigue is important. Shorter days and longer nights can disrupt your sleep rhythm, and so it's important to be mindful of that. Contractor oversight, ensuring that all parties involved in contractor work are familiar with all applicable policies. It is important to know that while OPPD employs approximately 2,200 employees, we rely on thousands of contractors to do work for us. So it's very, very important to remind people to follow procedures, and errors happen, human errors happen, and important for us to remind them of things that we need to do to do our work safely. And lastly, with fire safety, whether you're at home, at work, or vacation, important to know how to prevent fires. Same with, as I mentioned, with the run, hide, or fight, with fire prevention. Now is a good time to walk your family around your house. Where do you have fire extinguishers? Check on those fire extinguishers. Are they still valid? Have they expired? Do you need to replace them? And make sure that everybody knows where those are, how to operate them, just in case you ever need it. That concludes my safety briefing.
Thank you very much. So first up, we have the Governance Committee, and the chair report will be given by Janice Bolhoff. Amanda Buckner was not able to attend that meeting. Janice, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead. Thank you.
All right. So we had the governance pre-committee meeting on October 8th, and we did miss Amanda. She was not able to attend. We first reviewed the Leading Resource Inc. synopsis update, and Scott is going to work with Amanda to look at 7 potential policies for amending and updating some GPs and especially GP5 and GP8 and some other policy changes. So he, as well as GP14. So Scott will work with Amanda to get those reviewed and recommended changes. The next item on the agenda was the President and CEO Emergency Succession Plan, and we will be talking about that as a group here in a bit, as well as the Audit and Risk Committee Charter. Vice President Foch will be leading us through a discussion on that here in a bit. We talked about the 2024 engagement and survey results, and Vice President Purnell did talk to us about that they will be reviewing that with the entire board and the SD8 in December. But also that she does post in the director's update some first quartile comparisons and important information that's not relayed elsewhere. So if the she just wanted us to remind the directors that those directors' updates do contain information that doesn't get relayed in other forums. So please review those, that information as you get those directors' updates every other week. So, and the November polling information will be available in November, but again, it will be relayed in December in the SD8. We did look at the planning calendar and the board work plan and updated that to reflect progress on from this committee. So if any other committee members or Mr. Foch have anything to add, I'd be happy to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. I appreciate you stepping in my absence. The next item on our agenda here is talking about the risk committee charter. This was a topic that was discussed during our board workshop. And from there, from that workshop, Vice President Foch has drafted a charter for our review. The governance committee has weighed in on it, and it's now ready for the full board. So go ahead.
Excellent, great. Thank you, Director Wagner. I want to point you to a couple of things in order to facilitate review. What we're not going to be taking a look at is the data sheet, resolution, the red lines of policies, and the fullness of the charter. That's available to you in diligent. It's also available to the public on OPPD.com. Just a little bit of background. You know, the board, of course, has its current 4 standing committees, which I think have served the district well. And the audit subcommittee was a committee that was reporting up through finance. It was established in the year 2000. And I think this is important because the work for that committee was established also in the year 2000. And it also has been executing well. But if you think about the changing electric utility environment, the increased risks, how things have happened over time, things have changed substantially since the year 2000. In fact, one might say they've changed substantially since the year 2003 in ways that risks and awareness and the diligence of the board to that topic becomes ever increasingly important. And so it was through the filter of that conversation that the idea or the concept of having this broader or more expanded committee as a standing committee dedicated to risk emerged through a couple of things, most recently through the board workshop in August of 2024. So if we would like to go to the next slide here. Facilitate conversation, I just wanted to highlight what board actions would be required in order for this charter, the risk committee to be chartered. One is there would need to be the dissolution of the current audit subcommittee, as the audit subcommittee was formed through board resolution back in the year 2000. The second is establishing the risk committee charter. And I wanted to highlight a few things that show up in that charter. One is that risk committee membership. The proposed is that it would be the standing committee chairs. So there'd be a system, the chair of the system committee, the finance committee, the governance committee, and the customer and public engagement committee would be sitting on this committee. The thought being that as the risk committee convenes, it's able to hear information and make appropriate determinations in terms of what could be brought to the full board or to the various committees of the board. The meeting frequency would be quarterly. as planned. It could be more often if the committee made the determination that it needed to convene more frequently. The duties and responsibilities, there's quite a few policies that would shift over to oversight to this committee. GP 13 is external auditor relationship. GP 14, the board expense reimbursement, which is currently reviewed by the audit subcommittee, but would now be reviewed by this committee. Outside general counsel relationship would go from governance to this committee. BL3, board corporate audit relationship, would go from finance to this committee. BL11, settlement of claims and litigation, would go from governance or finance actually to this committee. SD 10, ethics, would go from governance to this committee. SD 11 or 12 rather, security and information management, would go from governance to this committee. And SD 15, enterprise risk management, would go from governance to this committee. The committee discussed a bit about SD 6 and the importance of safety, and really made no determination to move it out of systems where it has current oversight, but recognized that there would be safety related conversations that would likely show up as part of a risk discussion, and that acknowledgement at least was important. The duties then become more than just the financial reporting and disclosure, external audit, and internal controls, which are the existing accountabilities of the audit subcommittee. It expands to include broader risk management, compliance and ethics, as well as regulatory and legislative oversight. Let's not confuse this, because I confuse it for a moment, with the development. That is CPE and it clearly belongs there. But at some point when new regulations are installed or legislation is put in place, there are compliance requirements, and the risk committee at level oversight here would be centered around, are we doing what needs to be done to be fully compliant with these new laws and regulations as they exist, and to be able to provide that assurance. So before I move to the next bullet, are there any questions or comments or discussion on the duties and responsibilities more broadly, the risk committee charter?
Well, why the need for the change, I guess? Does this provide better oversight? Is this particularly removing the auditing from the finance committee, which is in fact the audit committee as well? What is the reason for this? And are we jeopardizing, are we kind of harming transparency a little bit, at least within the board?
Good questions. I'll take them. I'll take each one at a time. I would acknowledge that the second bullet, financial reporting, disclosure, external audit, internal control, works well currently under the audit subcommittee as it is. It's less clear to me that there's the same structure or approach or discipline centered around risk management, compliance, regulatory and legislative oversight, among other things. What this would create the opportunity is to acknowledge that the board has a responsibility, clear responsibility in these spaces, and set up a structure for those conversations to have as thoughtfully as they do within the finance committee or in the audit subcommittee. The number of risks have increased substantially over the last 24 years, one could argue. Compliance related implications have also shifted substantially, I think, during that time, as well as the implications from the shifting regulatory and legislative environment. So it's an opportunity to create that awareness. In terms of transparency, my hope, or the way I'm seeing it unfolding, would be that it could actually create more. First of all, there's a quarterly call to have conversation around these things in a very structured and meaningful way to the committee. Within that committee, with each of the chairs of the standing committees being assigned to them, they have an opportunity to hear that information and make appropriate determinations about what information could be brought back either to the committee or to the board as a whole. So I think the board generally will be getting more information and perhaps more relevant information to consider both at the committee level and at the board level. That's helpful.
Each of the concerns in bullet 3 are already being addressed or under the oversight of committees already, correct?
Risk management, a little bit, but not compliance informally. Well, where does NERC go? Where does all of that happen? Where does it go? And with regards to the actual regulatory and legislative oversight in terms of the execution of those changes and demonstration that we're in compliance with those, I'm unaware of formal conversations that have happened or brought back to the board for oversight. I'm very confident in what we're doing internally as an organization to be compliant in those spaces. This creates the opportunity for that conversation and awareness for the board.
Has this request, this idea, did this initiate with management or did this initiate with a board member or governors? Or this sort of workshop?
We talked about this during the workshop.
I can't remember this.
It was a big part of the workshop discussion. And prior to that, it emerged both in the finance committee discussion and in the governance committee discussion.
Okay.
What was happening was the annual review of the committee charters. And there was questions regarding the execution of the audit committee charter, technically how it worked, which led to a conversation then subsequently in governance about maybe this was something important for board consideration. It was brought up then at the workshop, and at that time, it seemed that there was consensus, if you will, of the board to move forward with this. So this is being responsive to that. Is that helpful?
Perhaps also, why don't you talk about not just what's happening at OPPD, but from an industry and governance best practice, from like an organizational governance structure. We're starting to see a lot of other organizations, both public and private,
Right.
having a committee that is specifically related to risk. So you wanna talk
That's
about that?
correct. Yeah, and I don't have the slide in front of me, but playing off of memory, thank you for that. During the workshop, one of the things we discussed was the traditional approach to this type of committee was really centered in that second bullet there. That was more of a traditional approach. What you're seeing subsequently in a number of both utilities, but also outside of the utility industry, is an expansion of this conversation as boards, both public and private, are being held more accountable to their oversight of risk management and compliance related issues. So as a result of that growing expectation of boards, you're seeing governing functions expanded or changed to address those concerns.
I just want to make sure we don't drift back to where we might have been years ago, where a select number of board members were, shall we say, in the crowd, and the other half wasn't. And that created some communication issues. And I think we've been pretty good about getting away from that through the last number of years. And I just hope we don't. I'm just sensitive about going back in that direction. Not a huge deal to me, but I just want to put that up.
Well, I think that's an important cautionary tale, and that's even along with it, so we don't have a vantage into anything that might have happened during the board. I assume that this committee would operate similar to the other committees, which is to say there will be a standing place on the all committee agenda where this committee would
There
report out
is.
as needed, right? So it's all the same mechanism should be in place so that, yes, it'll be 4 people that are on the committee, but eventually it's going to be a full board discussion.
Full disclosure.
Yeah, and as available today, like any information that's discussed in materials is readily available to. So I just want to acknowledge the availability of materials to see those that have been discussed. The chair of the committee would have the accountability to ensure there's information symmetry amongst the board members. And there would be plenty of opportunity, I think, to raise issues. Whether it be the annual workshop or others, should it feel like it's moving away from its intent. I think we're all very, very sensitive. I know as management, I'm very sensitive to that Director Kavanaugh in light of those conversations. The intention is to make sure it's designed in a way that would not create that.
And the makeup of the committee, did you already cover that or are you going to?
I did initially, yeah, it's the standing committee chairs.
Right, yeah, so the intention there is to make sure that the information is getting to each of the other committees by that mechanism so that, as was pointed out, the finance governance have talked about this quite a lot recently, but just by coincidence, you were on the other 2 committees, so apologies if it feels like there had been other discussions. The chair reports and the governance report tried to cover that, but that was kind of a coincidence. There is an intention to address that specific concern. I had 1 member of each of the 4 committees definitely in the risk committee to make sure that there is information shared to all the committees and all the board members.
Thank you for those questions. It's very helpful. The other thing I would acknowledge then is some governing documents would need to change. One, the current bylaws only would need to recognize this is a standing committee. There are committee charters, as I identified, there's policies that are shifting from one to the other. And that's really what the committee charter changes would indicate. And then with regards to board policies, there would need to be the recognition in policy GP8 of the committee, but also the current language speaks to monthly committee meetings for everything. It just needs to be able to be changed to reflect that. Is the frequency specified within the charter of the committee, but still holding itself accountable, Director Kavanaugh, to the debriefing that comes to the full board of any of those items and the expectation for those to happen. Given the fact that it's risk, it's unclear at this stage and would be dependent upon the discussions as to whether that takes place in closed or open, because there will be very sensitive information discussed with this committee for sure. Bless you. GP9 reflects also the meeting schedules that would be changing. GP11 or 13 rather reflects the assignment to the risk committee, and GP14 also reflects a change to assign it to the risk committee. These ones at the bottom of board policies just reflect that they're shifting from one committee to the next.
There won't be any concerns with the bonding agencies if we don't have a separate audit and designated audit committee. That's not an issue.
Yeah, I think we've got it covered here. We shouldn't have any problem. They'll be more excited too about the focus on enterprise risk. So it should be a good outcome.
Okay.
And in the charter itself, it does very specifically actually move forward the audit accountabilities into the auspice of this committee. So it is spelled out very specifically the accountabilities that the board and committee have. Well, the charter that the committee has to do it no different than it would under the office.
Scott, I've got one, and I know we're not going through the charter, but I did read through it and I do have one question. And I'll read it so people don't need to track it down. It's under the regulatory and legislative oversight duties.
Yes.
The last bullet. Ensure the utility has strategies in place to comply with evolving regulatory requirements, including reporting to the bond holders and implementing programs such as energy efficiency, conservation, and demand side management. What I want to confirm what we're saying there is the last piece, the programs related to energy efficiency, conservation, demand side management. What we're talking about here is the committee will have responsibility for ensuring district has strategies for those programs that are regulatory required, right?
Yes.
So it's not the stuff that we're doing voluntarily. It's regulation requires as much.
That's absolutely correct. And I needed to be very clear in my head multiple times as I read the bullets. So I wanted to make sure that it's clear. It is not meant to encroach or take on any way of the current accountabilities that exist in other places in this space. None at all.
Got it.
It's
Okay.
really to highlight it from a risk or from a compliance perspective to make sure that's being done.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you.
There may be some duplication and we find it over time. I will acknowledge too that the charter is reviewed annually.
Mhm.
So if we find that it's not working in practice the way it was intended, there's that regular opportunity to enhance and to create clarity, which I think with a new committee charter and a new committee, there's unlikely to be, or there's undoubtedly going to be some level of change over years, over 4 meetings to figure out what this looks and feels.
Great. My only other question is just mechanically speaking, we will approve this charter Thursday. Yes, and so I'm curious about when we want to call this group together. I know we've also got some committee shuffling that I assume is going to happen start of the year. So any sense for what that process is going to look like?
I will share mine and then write it back, but the committee assignments happen in January.
Yep.
The thought would be to have this at a March meeting, the first meeting convene in March, but it's important to have this determined by the January meeting, so the assignments can take place then.
Sounds great.
So we're looking at simultaneous approval of the charter and all associated policy updates, because we talked about that in the committee, and thank you for having that stuff ready. You do feel everything is set to go simultaneously with lots of tiny details, lots of places.
Yes, I reviewed multiple times and I am very hopeful. If we find something, I think we'll be able to adjust that through a normal course of maintenance, policy maintenance.
Appreciate that. And then to the point there, I guess this does imply one additional meeting for four of us, at least quarterly. So just to clarify for everybody that this is an expanded responsibility for the board. As things have gotten more complicated for the organization, we want to make sure that we understand this is a step up in our expected participation, or at least four of us assigned to this committee. So just make sure we all understand what we're saying here.
Any further questions?
Thank you very much for navigating us through this and getting it ready for us in time to be able to implement it in January. So
Thank you.
assuming it passes on Thursday.
We look forward to breathing life into it in the coming months and hopefully living up to the expectations that have been set for the board.
So next item on the agenda, if we're done with this one, okay, is to look at the CEO and emergency succession plan, President and CEO emergency succession plan. This item kind of came out of a couple things. At our state legislature, they had done some succession planning activities earlier this year before they went out of session. And it prompted the question, oh, do we need something here to also kind of articulate what happens in the event that our president and CEO becomes unable to fulfill their duties for an extended period of time, but maybe we can't convene a meeting rapidly to make a determination. So Scott, I'll pass it to you to walk us through this.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I really feel that Mikkel should be standing up here with me in spirit. We just flipped a coin and I'm I'm here. So please, if at any moment.
Short
intervene. Well, it was an interesting thing, right? Because it's very governance related and at the same time, it's very human capital related as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Additionally, I wanted to acknowledge both Steve Bruckner and Troy Meyerson, who provided a thoughtful review to this document. When I think about the past, well, from 2020 until now, we've certainly had a lot of exercise and opportunity when it comes to business continuity and ensuring things are working in the midst of any unforeseen circumstance that we can. And I think that we become better and better at it. In my mind, this document or this plan, if you will, is further acknowledgement of the need for something and the recognition of the board's commitment to addressing it. If we can flip to the next slide. Really to facilitate review, I just wanted to provide some highlights. Again, the plan in its entirety, as well as there are going to be a couple of policy changes that would need to be done, are both within diligent as well as posted on OPPD.com. The first thing to highlight is that this is really designed, and I'm going to read the words because the words are important, to ensure the continued effective management and leadership of the Omaha Public Power District in the event of an unexpected departure or incapacitation of its president and chief executive officer. And what it covers are all situations where OPPD's president and CEO is unable or unwilling to fulfill their duties, whether due to sudden illness, death, resignation, or any unforeseen circumstance, where the president and CEO is otherwise unavailable or unable to directly delegate his or her authority to a corporate officer. So at some point, what that means is that action needs to be taken. It would likely need to be taken immediately, which means that unless the board is convening immediately to address it, a plan needs to be in place with authorities vested in the plan from the board through its action to make sure that the smooth operations are allowed to continue. There was some conversation as to whether or not the board needed to review the plan, whether the board needed to act on the plan, but the reality is, unless the board has specified authorities to act, it needs a plan that's been approved by the board.
Is there existing policy now? I don't think there probably is.
No. We would like to think that we would be able to recognize it and handle it, but this is really formalizing that for sure. So I just wanted to walk through the basic components of the plan, just to make sure that there's an understanding. One is of the immediate response. There's a moment where the organization becomes aware there is a problem, there is an issue that aligns with what we're talking about here. And one of us, likely, or an executive officer, would be made aware of this somehow. However that happens, our obligation, if I'm the first officer, would be go to the VP of Human Capital which today is, of course, McHell, who would immediately notify both the designated successors, which we'll talk to in a moment, outlined in section 2, as well as OPPD's board chair. If for some reason the vice president was unavailable to do anything, the first person who became a known of that issue would make those communications to the designated successors as well as the board chair. And the board chair would then inform all board members and executive leadership team. Of course, it's really important that there's a confirmation. Yep, something happened. Yep, this is an issue. Yep, we need to implement this plan. And so the board chair would consult with the governance committee and confirm, yes, this rises to this occasion. There is this unavailability. We need to execute this plan, go. And the board chair then would communicate those initial steps to the board as well as to the full executive leadership team. So at that moment that determination is made, somebody needs to take charge because the CEO and president is no longer available to be in charge. So it was important to designate successors at that moment for them before there could be action. So from the minute of awareness, identification that there's a problem, the chief financial officer would step into the space of this designated successor for the president and CEO. If for some reason the chief financial officer were unavailable, the chief operations officer would step into that space. If for some reason the chief operations officer was unavailable, the board chair would assess the situation and make an appointment of a designated successor. Now, it's important that designated successor would have all the full authority that the board gives to the president and CEO to that designated successor as outlined in the bylaws, policies, position description, etc. And the designated successor would be focusing on maintaining the stability and continuity of the organization. And then there'd be an importance to notify the organization, notify employees, notify people that need to know internally and externally of what's happened. The appropriate level of information, obviously, nothing that would be sensitive or not need to be disclosed. So that fills that gap. The notion is that the board should convene and have a conversation around it. Because that gap has been filled immediately, it could be at the next scheduled board meeting. The board could still make the determination to call an emergency meeting, whatever it needed to do. But from the moment of initial awareness, there is a designated successor. The board would convene as soon as it determines appropriate to appoint an interim president and CEO. So the board could make the determination. It was good to have the CFO at this moment now, but really looking at what we know and everything we know now and workload of CFO, whatever those determining factors would be, the board then would make a more formal appointment and the approval of an interim leadership of the president and CEO.
So the title of the initial acting CEO would probably be acting, and then the interim one would be voted upon by the board, I guess.
That's right.
The terminology, I guess.
Yeah. And then they would really serve, the interim would be serving as acting.
Mhm.
So acting kind of
until
holds
permanent one is named if it comes to that.
That's correct. Yeah, if it comes to that, that's a great qualification. And again, this interim would have all of the responsibilities provided to him or her that currently is given to the president and CEO, and again, with the focus on maintaining the stability and continuity of operations. And then the communications would happen. At some point, and hopefully, the determination will be made, CEO is now back in a position to resume that role, but the determination would ultimately need to be made by the board. What were the factors that led to this? Where are we currently stating? How does that actually happen and inspire? Is the right action the reinstatement or the redelegation of those authorities back to that existing CEO? Or is there a need to continue on with their interim, or is there a need? So there really is a decision that the board needs to be making at that time to resume normal operations or to go out and recruit or do whatever it would need.
Where is that reflected in the language?
Number 4.
Evaluation, so then that calls for board action to
That's correct.
reinstate. Okay.
So the decision really is about reinstating, keeping the interim leader or moving forward with the selection committee.
Thank you.
I suppose the terminology in making the resolution to make the person the interim would go a long way in determining whether or not it would be necessary to have
Yes.
later resolution to undo that.
I agree with that. And Director Kavanaugh, I think because there's so like an infinite number of possibilities that could lead to this space, the design of the plan is to keep it open enough that would allow the decisions to be specific enough to the situation at the time that the decisions were being made by the board. And then I would just acknowledge too that the plan itself is to be reviewed on an annual basis. The oversight would go to the governance committee, which would annually review this and update as it determines appropriate. Any component of the plan could be updated. Hopefully it won't be because we've had to practice it.
Hopefully I'm more than
That is the hope. So are there any clarifying, are there questions?
Could I ask a question for the 2.3.1? The board chair is telling stakeholders, including employees, is the board included in employees?
The board will have already,
They're previously aware of the initial assessment under 1.2.1,
yeah.
but they don't have an awareness of the immediate successor. I mean, I assume that the board chair would be telling the board regularly.
Yeah, good clarifying question. I think what's happened in 1.2, of course, is the initial assessment and the
Right.
board chair having conversation. This could be amended to provide more clarity there. I think it's a good point, Director Howard.
I would include it. And then are we contemplating anything around anticipated departures or clarity where it's like, I know I'm going to be gone and I'm not going to be available. Who am I designating?
Yeah, the question that the governance committee did entertain that conversation and made the determination that to keep this focused just on this
Just on
type of
emergency.
situation. And to address that at another point through other policy discussion or however that needed to be discussed. The determination of best action was not determined at that time, only then
Only
to
that
focus.
This is the emergency one we should do first. Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent, thank you.
I like the recommended change to ensure the board is notified if that's 2.3.1. I think that's smart. The other thing that I was looking for as I was going through this is where does the full board take action?
Right.
Um,
I think a little clarity on the action.
So there's not required action in the appointment. There's only required action later to
Interim.
restore.
For the,
Right.
Yeah.
yeah,
sorry, the
Yeah.
interim.
And that's where I was
Right.
going. So that's 3.1.1. The board chair determines if it's appropriate, and then the board convenes to appoint the president. I found myself thinking, and this is no judgment, but the board chair has a lot of responsibility. And in this case, is, as I read it, really the person delegated with the responsibility to determine when it is appropriate. And I wondered, I think this is a question for me, is further down somewhere we talk about the board chair in collaboration with the governance committee, or like, I like the idea of having the governance committee playing a role in kind of directing the board chair, not directing, but guiding or in consultation with.
So simply changing 3.1.1 to as soon as the board chair in collaboration with the governance committee
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
determines it is
I don't think there's so much friction in that, and by that time, we've already got somebody acting in the role. It's just a matter, is it time to move to this interim model, which should allow for us to make a deliberate decision.
Well, just saying something like in collaboration, does that really cover it? I mean, the chair could basically have an opinion of what he wants to do and run it by the governance committee. The governance committee can say, hey, you're crazy, but then he can do what he wants anyway. But he's been in collaboration. He hasn't been in agreement, or there hasn't been any type of
Yeah,
voting. It's-
Yeah.
Is that okay? I get these, hopefully it's something we never have to address.
The I turn to council for a quick comment. If there's any suggested language to accommodate that, the spirit and intent clearly would be collaboration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to your point, if that led to a frozen or a stalemate, like what happens to break free of that collaborative space? Because collaboration actually isn't happening.
I think you can't butt in, you're giving me capacity.
gone.
You'll be gone.
I'm fine.
I'm just having fun listening here.
I think you need to go back to the very beginning and consider what this policy is for. And this is generally for an emergency situation, which in all likelihood would be short-lived, right? In all likelihood. So I think just in terms of expediency, having the board chair have most of the responsibility to kind of keep things rolling on this appointment is good. I think it's a really good point, I think, to do that, in collaboration with the governance committee. I think that makes some good sense. But I think you want to have a pretty smooth process to get that immediate successor in place. And then for the board chair, again, I think it could be in collaboration with the governance committee to set a date. If it looks like it's going to, that a successor is going to be needed for a longer period of time, that would probably be established for the next available board meeting, because it would take an action of the entire board, obviously, to appoint that, the interim, what we would call an interim CEO. Is that responsive to the question, Mike?
Yeah, I think so. And again, it'd be short term, and even if the decision made by the chair was deemed to be egregious by the rest of the board, you can always call a special committee meeting.
That's exactly
meeting
right.
If we had to.
That's exactly
So,
right.
yeah, I think I'd be okay with the chairman having that authority, because it's my opinion.
Remember, individual board members do have, authority in the scenario that you described to see that a formal meeting is called to address that kind of a concern. So you're quite right.
And if I could add to yours, Counselor, any board member has the opportunity to add to the agenda any topic that it would choose to have. So should that arise, the conversation could be had.
I also had a clarification around the governance committee language. Is the expectation that it would be at least a quorum of the governance committee? Like, it's not like I met with the chair and I chatted with the committee. I'm not clear on whether you need the entirety of the governance committee or a quorum.
The way it's worded would be envisioned would be the entirety well,
Yeah.
they can't make decisions technically.
There is no quorum for a
Right. How many members are on that?
Two, but we don't find that.
Three. Yeah, it's a little bit of a strange thing, because you could say I collaborated with the governance committee and only met with one of them, as opposed to all four.
And so, just to clarify, we're talking about the third option here, right?
Right.
Another way of
The
solving.
initial assessment, it just tells the governance committee.
Yeah, the very assistant, the very, the
You've got it
board
in
chair will
multiple
consult when they're
places.
making the determination if this is an issue. It's not just resting on the board chair to
Right.
go, oh, this is an issue.
Yeah.
The board would actually, just in consultation and the collaboration, meet with the governance committee to say, I think we have a problem. Do you concur? And to your point, could that be the chair? Does that need to be the entire committee? I think the vision was that it would be calling the committee to act. What we know today happens in committees, people who can attend. If that needs to be spelled out. So then it's one or two or three, like the notion is you've called the committee.
You've called the committee and then one person shows up.
Then one, yeah, and then one person shows up.
It lacks a little bit of clarity, but I think if we ever have to test it, we'll learn how it works.
Yeah, well, that's what I was just gonna say. It's probably close enough to get it,
Yeah.
give us the direction.
I think it's just, I don't want to see a world where it's just the board chair and the governance chair and we like figured it out. And then everybody's like, wait a minute, we don't want that decision made in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I think there's a reason why the committee is named. That's because the governance chair shouldn't be the only person. But thinking through, if you really want it to be the committee, then we should clarify that the committee actually should be involved.
Agree with that.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, it's still better than what we have now, which is nothing.
Right.
Yes.
Jeez.
So
It's fine as is, it's fine.
it's
as
fine.
is.
I was wondering.
But I think at some point, if we ever tested and we feel like that lacks the clarity that the board chair needs to prove up that they met the requirements,
Yes.
because I think more of this is to make sure the board chair feels supported. And
I
can
would
prove
acknowledge-
that they met the requirements.
I would acknowledge too, that one of the reasons behind having this immediate appointment of a designated and then bringing the board in, it becomes a way, I think, of managing the worst of those situations so that it's only temporary in its nature. And the board is expected to be engaged quite quickly. And then to both counselors' point and others, any board member can add an agenda item at any time or call for a meeting if they needed to. So if for some reason it were going off the rails in a way it wasn't intended, the existing nature of the board policies and governing practices would allow for that to be corrected. God forbid that any of that happen. And making sure I'm not sending any intention out to the universe.
Yeah.
Problems that nobody needs to have. Yeah, good. Any additional feedback? My apologies, I think I
Just to
took
be clear
over
that
10 minutes for both.
On immediate unexpected circumstances, things begin activating without action.
Right.
And then action is only required from the chair or the board later after 2 is done.
Yes.
By the time we get to 3, that's when action begins to be necessary. Is that clear for, yes?
The action being the board coming to itself and passing resolution, whatever it needed to do
Right.
to reflect, yeah.
But the point here is that the first thing happens automatically. We do not need to think about it at the time. It's notification only. And then later there would be discussion and action necessary to either move backward to back to reinstate or move to interim, that kind of stuff. Right.
Saving the revised copies.
Scott? Yeah, so I think that's good, and sorry, this is hopefully not a nit, but I'm looking at 211. In the event of an immediate and unexpected availability of the president, should that be unavailability of the president?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's an important
Good one.
clarifier.
I caught it upon my fourth read of it, so.
Well, I've probably read it 400 times, so thank you. for- Any other thoughts or
I
feedback?
unexpectedly became available.
Clearly, I underestimated the agenda time. That's my apology.
Finally working.
I think the only thing I would request is that in 2.3.1, we add the board.
Yeah.
Yep.
And probably in 3.3.1, but really, if we're making a decision there, we should know already.
Yes. I have added that red line, it will be red line and approved on Thursday, of course, but I have added that and it will added in collaboration with governance committee for 3.1.1. Director Core.
Sorry to add to it.
No, it's very.
You've done all this work for what to do and then notify the board. Do you want something in there for the exception if the chair is out of the country, out of town?
Man,
I mean, chair or vice chair.
If the chair is unavailable.
Yeah,
Javier and I are together in a car accident.
that's it. Sorry to raise it, but
No, that's really.
I would be okay with it reading the board chair or the vice chair
Or designated.
Yeah.
I think that's already covered in vice chair roles in the event that the chair is not
if
available.
that covers it, great.
It is.
Yeah.
It's also covered in the bylaws.
Yeah,
Perfect.
so that immediately transfers also, so. Good point.
So am I hearing a need to change or is there the desire to still?
It's good.
So we're good as is. Excellent. Thank you for the thoughtful review as we have to think about something as horrific as having to execute this, but mentally, I think it's been a good challenge to put forward.
Just want to make sure we say this out loud. Does anyone whose specific role is listed in this document have any thoughts or comments? All good?
We've all talked about it, reviewed it.
I assume so. I just wanted to make sure that we said that out.
Now with these, they're asking me to be extra careful. If I may, really quick, and I'm gonna address this topic and the previous one on risk. When I took on this new job, or it's not new anymore, but when I took my current job, one of the things that I often refer to as things that help me sleep well at night. And those are functions related to governance, compliance, risk, audits. Those are the type of functions that help any CEO sleep at night. Make sure that we have the good controls in place. I am pleased to see the discussion we had in the previous item on the risk committee that helps bring additional focus and the level of discussion happening. It helps me sleep at night, honestly, to have colleagues, board and governance, enhance that governance function. In that same topic, I brought this up to Scott a while ago. It's about a year more ago. So you know what? Something that would help me sleep at night a little bit better is knowing that, you know, if I am not able to do my job, say I get into an accident or something, I trust the organization will continue to carry on really well, but we really didn't have that gap covered. In my previous organization, there was a very clear succession plan and it was all approved. And I think this is a really good step forward that allows for flexibility. It allows for some discussion within the governance committee, et cetera. Eventually, the board would have to appoint a new CEO, whether it is on an interim basis or permanent basis. But this is really to cover the few days, perhaps weeks in between when I become unavailable and I'm not able to delegate, right? If it's something sudden and the time that the board meets. So I really appreciate having this. I think it's good governance practice. I think out of everyone in this room, I'm the one who probably doesn't want these to ever be used. But it's good to have this in place. So thank you for entertaining that option and entertaining this for board consideration on Thursday.
Any additional thoughts?
So a little bit of a strange twist. Two of our governance committees are not, governance members are not in the room right now. So Janice, did you have any thoughts or comments?
No, I think that the discussion really reflects what the committee intended with this. So thank you. And thanks, Scott. We kind of pushed you to do all of this review of not only this, but of the all the changes that need to be made in all of the GPs and BLs and everything for both this and the risk committee. So thank you for bringing this forward.
Great. And yeah, Director Buckner had to step out for a second. So any additional thoughts, comments? Okay, on that, we would expect this to be on the agenda for approval with the associated actions and the red lines on Thursday.
That's correct.
Sounds good.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
Okay, and with that, that's the end of the governance committee with Amanda out now. Next, we have the finance committee. We do have a specific time-sensitive break for lunch coming. So I think we want to let's do the finance committee chair report first, get through that quickly, and then we're going to take a break for lunch intentionally, and then we'll come back for other finance committee action or discussion after that.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Chair Williams. The Finance Committee met on October 4th for a kind of a long meeting following our safety briefing and a review of the previous month's committee action items. We entertained a grants update from Lisa Olson, which was entertained also, I think, by this Systems Committee as well, just to keep us up to speed on what was being considered and the progress with those. So that was very interesting. Then we had a coming action item, regulatory accounting for the 2024 storm costs, which we're going to hear about after lunch, followed by the 2024 corporate operating plan excess expenditures request, which again, we will hear more about after lunch. Following that, we spent quite a bit of time with a 2025 corporate operating plan planning, a rate action review, and 5-year outlook, which is a peak that we got that will be talked about more in November, but it's available to all of you and Diligent as well. So following a little glance at the board work plan and a little summary of the meeting, we adjourned actually pretty much on time. So it was kind of remarkable. So that ends my chair's report, and we'll wait until after lunch for the 2 main action items.
Okay, sounds good. Appreciate the flexibility on that, but we have, like I said, something specific to get to in the parking lot. And with that, we will adjourn and we will come back at 12 o'clock. Welcome back from lunch, everyone. We'll continue with the Finance Committee. Director Spurgeon.
Thank you. So we are going to hear about item 4 on our agenda, the regulatory accounting for 2024 storm costs. Bishop.
Excellent. I will pass it over to Laura Langford, our Director of Corporate Accounting and Controller. This will be an item that we're looking to get board approval on Thursday. That'll pass it to you, Laura.
Well, good afternoon. I'm sure you're excited. You stated that it's a really exciting topic for after lunch, regulatory accounting. My team finds it exciting, but so we're going to talk about an item that we are planning to bring to the board as a board action this Thursday, and it's to use regulatory accounting for the storm costs that we have for 2024. As you know, we've talked about 24 has been a pretty challenging year for storms. We've had a lot of costs that have come through relative to making repairs and restoring power to our customers. We do expect, though, that most of it will be recoverable from FEMA. And so from the FEMA perspective, there are 4 kind of buckets of storms that we have. We had the April tornado. We had a string of storms in late May. There was the flooding event in June, and then we had a storm also then, and then, of course, the historic July 31st storm. All of those storms have been declared a disaster by the state of Nebraska. They've been sent to FEMA for approval. The first 3 have received the official presidential declaration and have been signed as a disaster. We do expect to receive that also for the July 31st storm. We've heard within the next month that will be officially signed off on. So with an accounting perspective now, to shift to we had the storms, how do we account for that? So this year we've incurred those costs, and our accounting standards would require us to recognize those costs as expenses when they incur. So the financial statements you see recently have included all of those expenses to this point. We also then will be eligible for revenue from FEMA as we get those grants. That'll be counted as revenue. However, even though they're declared, we can't count that as revenue until the grant agreements are signed. And so for FEMA, that specifically means the project worksheets. That takes time to work through those with FEMA. That will maybe have some this year, but the bulk of that will occur in future years. So from an accounting standpoint, we'll have the expenses this year and revenue in future years. The accounting standards also allow us to use regulatory accounting. And so with that, we're able to have expenses or revenues in a period that's different than what you normally would include. But we need to have board approval of that, and that is based on the board's rate-making authority. Regulatory accounting is very common. It's something that a lot of utilities use just based on the rate-setting process. OPPD has used it. We have regulatory assets right now. The board has approved previously items like pension and OPEB costs and bond financing costs. So it's not something new to OPPD either. So if we use regulatory accounting, we feel like we'll have a better match of the expenses to the revenue. And so we will remove the expenses from the financial statements this year, the ones that are eligible for reimbursement. They will, from the income statement, they will then sit as a regulatory asset that we would then recognize in future years to match up to the revenue for the projects as we receive that from the sign-offs from FEMA. And given just the magnitude of the expenditures, we think that makes a lot of sense to try and match them up better. So we can go to the next slide. Just to give you a sense of the cost. So these are still estimated costs. The team is still kind of scrubbing through these and getting all the final costs in place. But these are the estimated costs for the storm this year, for the storms this year. We do expect that we can recover about $33 million. That's 87.5%. That's our best estimate based on the recent activity that we've had with FEMA. We believe that's how much we'll be able to recover over the next several years. And of course, the revenue is different than the cash flows. We still have money we are owed from the 2019 flood, but OPPD has strong liquidity, and so the cash is really not a concern with us getting that right away. So if we have regulatory account approved at the end of the year, then once all the expenditures have been trued up for the estimated cost, we will then create a regulatory asset. So it'd be, at this point, it'd be about $33 million. We would reduce our expenses for this year, hold that on our balance sheet as an asset, and then recognize that in future years as we have the revenue to match up with it. So we'll be asking the board for approval, and I think we have a draft of the resolution in here as well. That we'll ask the board to approve, and then we can put that in place at the end of this year. Are there any questions?
Yeah, Laura,
Yeah.
as far as the cost of mutual aid, how does that work? Do we reimburse those that provide the mutual aid to us, or is that assumed by the providing utilities?
We reimburse them for their costs, and then we submit that to FEMA for reimbursement.
And then that's included in those figures?
Yes, that's included in there. Yep, exactly.
Laura, given all the misinformation that's happening around the country, around FEMA, can you just touch on, are we expecting any changes? Is this normal, par for the course of what we've experienced? Is your team experiencing or anticipating anything different?
We're not anticipating anything different. I know we've heard rumors about FEMA's out of money, but that's not a concern for us. They said that won't impact the public assistance. We should still have these declared. Cash may be slower, but quite honestly, it was a little slow before. If anything, so far FEMA has really been pushing for the first 3 storms that have been declared to try and get information sooner. It seems that they have increased their staff. They've hired some contractors to help move things along faster, which is great because we are just now closing out the 2019 flood, the storms in 2021. It just takes a while to get those closed out with FEMA. So we don't anticipate anything different other than it looks like they have more staff to support.
Great update. Again, horrific 2024 season from a storm perspective. We all lived through that, impacted our communities, obviously at cost as well. Being able to get FEMA and HEMA reimbursements, fantastic. A lot of other jurisdictions don't get that for storm costs and or they'll push them aside. There's some material this year. It's really a benefit for us to advance forward this regulatory accounting to make sure on the books that they match up. But again, just a good outcome that we were able to move forward on. And again, would ask the board to approve that so we can match the expenses and the revenues. Otherwise, they get mismatched. It causes oddities. We need to explain our financials, different actions we did take. So this is really more just asking the board to allow us to take that accounting, utilize that accounting treatment that we've used before.
Any further questions from the board?
All right.
Great explanation. Thank you very much.
This is our
And the next item is approval of the revised 2024 expenditure.
All right, we'll be asking the board for approval to move forward with our excess expenditures request. So from a financial controls perspective, folks remember when we get the COP approved, there's a set limit that's approved in terms of total financial spend. That was done in December, $2,107 million. As we've gone throughout 8 months of the year, so we've got 8 months of actuals to work off of, plus 4 months of forecast. That's when we first came up with this estimate. We're seeing higher costs come through, and I'll walk you through what those are, but we're asking to finish out the remainder of the year. We'd be asking for $116 million. So that would increase the total expenditure level to $2,238 million. This also assumes that we do move forward with the FEMA recovery, so we put those expenses out. And so predicated on the approval of the regulatory accounting resolution, that would reduce by roughly $33 million. Would highlight that this is just one side of the equation. It just highlights the expenditure side. Again, it's a good financial control, so we make sure that we're apprising the board of any additional expenditures that are coming through, but doesn't include the revenue offsets. We do have about $92 million of additional revenues that we don't have fully reflected here, again, because it's one side of the ledger that we're getting approved. When we look at specifically what the drivers were to increase our costs for 2024, a good amount of that had to do with outages that we experience in our generation facilities. When those aren't generating, we're out in the market purchasing power. We've got additional costs of about $84 million associated with that. Also higher, some of our industrial customers have a flow through in terms of wholesale prices. So when wholesale prices go up, those are recognized. We do have an offset in revenues, but again, that sits in $84 million. And then the increment that's not covered relative to storm restoration costs plus some additional cable locating costs have increased. That gets us to another $14 million above what we had budgeted. Lastly, on the capital expenditure side, we did accelerate the CT purchases for 3 units for Cass County plus 1 for Turtle Creek Standing River Lake. And so that adds at roughly $38 million. Again, there's a lot of different items that go through the capital program, but that by far was the largest adjustment that's driving that. When we look at the total amount, it's actually $105 million. We'll see it here in a moment. We've asked for a 10% contingency. Again, we're trying to figure out where we're going to end up the year. So we've taken our best look at the forecast and then added a 10% contingency on that. Go to the next slide. Here's where we've got again, what the drivers are. Power purchase increases 84 million, capital expenditures. We did see our fuel expenses come in lower. That's a bit of an offset. Driver of that is the fact that Turtle Creek and Standing Bear Lake didn't come on as anticipated in Q3, so we're spending less from a fuel perspective. As we look at other items that are coming through at the year-end financials, again, favorability in terms of off-system sales, that is helpful. Again, that's on the revenue side, so that doesn't get incorporated here. Helping to offset some of the higher purchase power and O&M costs. Again, just some different items that are going pluses and minuses as we look at the year-end forecast. And again, we've talked about these items as we do the quarterly update, and then we'll also be talking about them in more detail as we do the Q3 update next month. And we'll also have the COP as well that will cover where we end in 2024. We go to the next slide. Again, here's the detail that gets us down to the 105. This nets some of the items. Remember, fuel cost came in $22 million under. That's offset against the purchase power of 84 million. But you can see by category specifically what the drivers are to get us down to the total expense of 105. And then again, as I'd highlighted, we did include a 10% general contingency just to account for uncertainty that will come in the next 4 months. As this again was based upon 8 months of actuals. Go to the next slide. Great question came up. What's the history around excess expenditures? We went back, we looked at 5 years. Thank you for the question that came in the Finance Committee meeting. We've had this in place where we've come to the board for this will be the 4th year straight. We went back and looked at, you don't see 2020 on there. Well, that's because we actually came at or below our expenditures in 2020. But for the past 5 years, for the 5 years, we've come to the board. Again, you know, when you look at these, not unanticipated. When you think about 2021, we had polar vortex. That was the big adjustment that came through. And again, this is just one side of the equation. So we've got revenues that come in to offset a portion of these, but did want to provide the historic perspective of when we brought this back to the board. And again, this is a good financial control to make sure the board's apprised of where we're coming in and how we're doing against our expenditure authorization. And so again, wanted to provide the history of when we brought this back to the board. We go to the next slide.
That's all I have.
Okay. We would have, there's a resolution that's contained in the deck. Folks will make sure they're aware that. I wanted to see if there's any questions around this request.
If I may, we've talked about this in the past. It's not the first year we're doing this. In fact, this is the 4th year in a row. And prior to 2020, we've done this as well. On a budget of $2 billion, a $116 million adjustment, it's significant, but it's less than 5%. And so what I just from a context perspective, as the board sets rates and sets the adequate resources for every year, and that results in rate setting for customer owners. I really appreciate the approach that Jeff and his team takes. That it helps us be conservative, right? We're projecting, we're forecasting the expenditures we think are the right amount of expenditures and revenues coming in. The type of storms that we get, we don't forecast them. And that's good, right? Because some years we do get them, some years we don't. And when we do, and we incur in additional expenditures, then we have a mechanism to correct that, to get the authorization from the board to expend those resources. And we have the corresponding revenues. In this case, it's not 1 for 1, but a significant part of these expenditures are going to be offset by those revenues. The alternative would be building in significant amounts of contingencies up front, which would put the pressure on rates, and we may or may not need those, right? So I just wanted to put that context in here, and that it may not feel the right thing. Hey, our expenditures came in higher than budget, but it's by design. We're doing that as a way not to put undue pressure on customers if we don't know we're gonna need those resources throughout the year. This year clearly was one year when we've needed those resources with all the storms and outages, but that may not be the case going forward. In fact, I'm knocking on wood that won't be the case every single year.
Yes, maybe I missed it earlier too, but where will this cash come from? Is it the fund where we have X number of days of cash in the bank, if you will?
Yeah, we've got ongoing cash on hand to be able to handle this. Plus, again, we've got other revenues, so this doesn't show the fact that we've got almost $52 million of congestion hedging revenues this year. So again, it's just one side of the equation, but from a cash flow perspective, that's something that's important. And especially as we think too, given back on the regulatory accounting side again, that does present a little bit of a mismatch relative to, incurring the expenses in 24, potentially not getting those for a year or longer, but we've got the ability to draw upon our existing cash on hand to facilitate that. That's a good question.
So obviously this cash transfer will not result in any type of rate increase or any issues related to it as well.
So we'll plan to definitely hit our 2 times coverage. As we look at the COP, we'll be bringing that back relative to amounts that would need to be in the RSA. So the rate stabilization account, this is what we utilize if we're going to be below 2 times coverage. We expect we're going to be bringing forward roughly $13 million associated with that. Again, we're still figuring out what that's going to be, but that'll be part of the next month's presentation.
Questions? I was just reminded in another meeting that the budgets are the plan that you make, and then real life happens and you adjust because you have to. So, and I like that this is something that we don't have to deal with unless we have to deal with it. So it's smart to keep that out of the rate making instead of part of it. Any other questions? And thanks. Oh, Matt, sorry.
Just kind of go off what Javier mentioned. Is there any benefit to adding into the COP a minimal projected shortfall? If we're looking historically back on our low, like 2022 being the lowest shortfall, or does that put constraints on you for the budget?
In terms of for storm costs or?
Yeah, just, if we've consistently exceeded it, I guess if you can just speak to how you approach that.
Yeah, I guess, and again, we'd want to look at both sides of the equation here, because there'll be years where we came in, for example, favorable because revenues were elevated. So that wouldn't be captured here. We wouldn't want to artificially adjust. And again, that's what all that's incorporated in terms of the COP, where we'll look at both sides. And so we feel very comfortable with that. We've decided historically not to include storm costs and to separate that as a separate item. Just because, again, you don't know when those are going to happen. And in years where you don't have storms, you don't want to have elevated rates for an expenditure that's not going to materialize. We have a lot of debate internally around that. A lot of utilities handle it differently, but we try to keep rates low as a result of that by not incorporating them. But when we do need to call upon the RSA or other mechanisms to facilitate exceptional years, that's what we have that mechanism in place for.
And we remember that RSA, the rate stabilization account, went from 50 to 75 million a year ago. So that helps from a liquidity perspective. Mike, you were asking, where is the money coming from? Well, we have ways for us to pay for these overages while the rest of the money comes.
And this is, I guess, a perfect example of why we have the rate stabilization fund.
Thank you.
I believe the Finance Committee is complete. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. Next committee up, that's the Customer and Public Engagement Committee. Director Howard.
Director Williams. So the Customer and Public Engagement Committee met on October 7th. We went over our SD13 Stakeholder Outreach and Engagement Monitoring Report. We had a customer growth update and a grants update. Customer growth we covered in our closed session. If you are curious about our grants update, we would recommend you review the slides that are in Diligent. And so today we're just going to be talking about the SD13 stakeholder outreach and engagement monitoring. And I'll pass it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Chair Howard. I'm so proud of OPPD and how we've evolved this important effort. Director Kavanaugh and Director Moody, you've been here from the very beginning of this journey, so thank you for that. And this monitoring report that Kate Thomas and the team, Brooke Aiken and the team have worked so hard on really illustrates how it's evolved over the years. It gives us the flexibility to talk about the different programs that we've done because one size does not fit all with this. So it's very difficult from a measurement standpoint. I also want to say OPPD is leading the way in this area, and they have been both in the industry as well as outside of our industry because we get pinged all the time to say, tell us about what you're doing. Tell us about the tools that you use. And we've, adopted an international process that has served us well. We also have used an international platform with OPPD Community Connect as one of our tools to really gather up information. So in our line of work, multiple ways and multiple times can you communicate and provide that feedback. So with that, Kate, please.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm Kate Thomas. I'm Director of Corporate Marketing Communications. And on behalf of all of our public affairs and customer service and really the whole organization, happy to talk about our efforts to bring SD13 to life over the past year. And it is truly a team effort. So as a spokesperson, I might not know everything, but I'll have a phone a friend with Ms. Aiken and Ms. Sarah Lake in the back if needed. So if you have some outreach specific questions, they might have even more detail. So SD13, our stakeholder outreach and engagement, SD, calls us to do a few things. I'll just read this here briefly to let it sink in. As a publicly owned utility, OPPD is committed to engaging its customers, the community, and other stakeholders. OPPD shall, 1, use an integrated, clear, and transparent engagement process that provides meaningful ways for customer owners to participate and provide feedback, and as representative of the interested, impacted customer owner segments that OPPD serves. Second, we must share context with customer owners around key decisions. And then third, continuously evaluate and improve our processes. Okay, next slide. So before we get into how we've approached each of those items, we thought this slide would really help set some context, which was just helpful for us as we were doing our own reflection and preparing this. So before we touch on that, just wanted to share this. It's really over the past 6 years, so since 2018. And in 2018, that's when we started really thinking about outreach in a formal way. And we began with 2 efforts, an SD7 revision, right ahead of our 2019, kind of major revision there, and then community solar outreach and engagement. And those were engagements that were between 6 and 12 months. And now to date, 2024, you'll see that we have 21 projects listed, actually many more than that, because we, in that count, have included a category called major projects, which in and of itself has 20 discrete projects that are in its infancy. And so we counted it as one for simplicity's sake, but it will continue to ramp up. So you can see there's certainly a curve, maybe not quite an exponential growth, but on its way. In addition, I think what's interesting is those projects that we're seeing now, an average of 36 months to 48 months. So we're adding and we're continuing kind of a high level of outreach. And we can feel it, and we think that our customer owners are seeing lots of things going on in the community, and so I'm sure that resonates with them as well. But our team has added team members, not to the scale that we've experienced growth. So we still feel very strongly that we're maturing in our approach, and so we want to talk about how the SD13 framework has helped us do that and scale accordingly. Slide. Okay, first and foremost, we think we've done that by leaning on this strong foundation that we've built as a result of the guidance of SD13. We know SD13 has been revised a couple of times, and it feels really good where it's at, and it's helped us to build upon this foundation and scale. So First, let me just orient you to this slide. We heard some great feedback from another monitoring report that it's helpful when we have a little bit of self-assessment. So you'll see a dial here. We'll talk about why and how we've self-assessed ourselves in these areas. And then, as we see some areas for challenge and improvement, we'll talk to that as well. But it's in that brightest green category because we do feel really strongly that the board's support and use of the International Association for Public Participation Guidelines is what has set us up for success. It's really given us a paradigm to follow, because part and parcel of that approach is the fact that we not only have to be transparent, but that we need to rely on subject matter experts within our organization to help do the outreach. And because of that, we've helped create a culture of outreach and engagement, and that is what has allowed us to scale. It's no longer just a dedicated effort within public affairs or a little bit within customer service. It's a culture, and so that's been tremendously helpful. And we also have built, a strong foundation for just the channels, the structure in which we communicate and reach out to everyone. So everything from adding commentary to our committee meetings now, to making sure that we always have 24/7 channels to engage folks on OPPD Community Connect and so on, and even our board contact forum, which has a dedicated role, and Lisa Bowen, who does an outstanding job making sure that that feedback is addressed. And then finally, representative of the interested and/or impacted customer segments. That's also really built into our approach. We've seen growth and change across our service area, and as such, we want to make sure that our efforts are where the change is, and we've seen that happen across our segments. I think we're in a good spot from structure, but we want to bring this to life a little bit more deeply. So next slide, please. So for reference, when we're talking about an integrated, clear, and transparent process, this is the universal engagement spectrum that IB2 has published and which we use. And the way to think about this spectrum, if you've never seen it, is that one project doesn't just use one level of engagement. It may use multiple involvement levels across different project phases and different stakeholders. So for example, those who are most impacted by a change may be engaged more further to the right? They should have more say if they are most impacted. That's not to say that all of our customer owners might not deserve to be informed about everything. And so we must also have information, ready and available for them as well. So we'll just pause, but this, when we talk about a framework, is just an example of the rigor that we put into that approach. Okay, next slide. And just one example from this year that shows exactly how we've used multiple levels of engagement from IEP2, and that's really our Cast-to-SRP transmission project, which has been one of our most active projects over the past 18 months or so. And you can see that we've had, 3 of our, several phases in this spectrum involved. So for all customers and stakeholders, we offer a variety of sources to help them feel informed about the project, from tactical fact sheets and web resources to educational open houses where people can choose to ask questions or just learn and speak any concerns. We also have consulted with local leaders and even OPPD employees who live in the area to really understand what their concerns are as not just employees, but as members of the community, to see what questions they're hearing, to understand any preferences for engagement within the community. And we also make sure that we follow up and let them know that their feedback is directly helping us inform what those approaches would look like. And then for those customers and stakeholders who would mostly be most directly impacted, from landowners to neighbors, we involve them in route decision making, which is not easy, right? By soliciting their feedback on routes. At our open house, we used interactive mapping and GIS tools to show those potential routes, and we asked for their thoughts and concerns. And we made sure they had access to a project hotline and OPPD Community Connect so they could continue to follow up after the process. It's I'll go to the next slide and we'll see the results here. But transmission, choosing a transmission route is difficult, and we want to involve those who are impacted and aware, but there are very real constraints, technical and otherwise, that we have to follow. And so not 100% of the people will always be happy. That being said, we felt really good, if you'd hit the next slide, that in measuring our progress after some of our outreach, 87% of respondents of this survey agreed that at the minimum, they understood the purpose and the need for the new transmission line and that it was adequately explained. Now, that's one measure. There are multiple ways of measuring engagement, but we felt like that was something that helped us understand where our strengths and maybe opportunities were. Pause. Okay. Next, SD 13 asks us to share context with customer owners around key decisions. And if you've looked around, the way in which you get information is more fragmented than ever. And earning trust is even more fragmented than ever and more difficult to do. And so the approach that you have to take is both breadth and depth. And we've always been very thoughtful about trying to coordinate how we share customer context with customers and stakeholders across different channels. But I think what's different from last year is that we're a little bit more mature, and I think we've taken more of an ecosystem approach, a nod to an approach that we have shared in SD5 about how we make sure that we understand how each sphere in this graphic is impacted by and impacts the other. So each of these spheres that you see, there's just ongoing discrete efforts that are always happening. And we're coordinating enough as an organization to understand that something that happens in a small group might impact the way that we show up an event, or even something that we might hear from a board meeting or a comment from a wire story can trickle into those tailored channels and small groups in itself. So there's a structure in place, and that's mostly through just strong relationships with customer service and across our organization that we really have to think about it as an ecosystem, and it keeps going. So in the interest of time, I won't drain this slide, but you can see many of the different ways in which we do that. Okay, and we'll show just an example then of how that was brought to life. If you want to go to the next slide. Maybe one back. There we go. And so we do think it's this ecosystem approach that helped us show up in a more mature way during the July 31st response. Now, we certainly have lots of lessons learned, but because we were able to scale and had a much more organized and I think cohesive effort, we are able to scale much more quickly and do things like handle tens of thousands of tweets, customer inquiries, and calls. Lots of lessons learned from it, but it is this more mature approach that's really helped us. Within minutes of the storm hitting, we already were coordinating internally to make sure there were phone calls to all the right local officials, that we were sharing information broadly because all of these areas have to be working on, and setting up as much information as we could for even our local officials who might need a newsletter or some type of information to share. Just an example of what that looks like. And if you hit the next slide, and we can talk about this in the third element of SD 13, but we saw and learned a lot as well. We want to mention now that we did learn quite a bit from that July storm, and we immediately implemented some lessons learned that you might be noticing now. In short, what we learned, I think this is just a good approach in general with communication, is our customers were telling us, especially around all things storm, outage, and preparation, they want frequent, very practical information in many different forms about how OPPD is preparing and how they're preparing. So no matter if it's the same information that they've heard many times, they want to see it in a lot of different ways, more frequently than you'd think. And so you'll notice that we've had some new content that's been developed around that. We're even engaging customers in a new platform. We are formally on Instagram now because we recognize that we were perhaps missing some of our audience and some of our younger audience as we were navigating the storm. So excited to see that taking off as well. And if we hit the next slide, that's some broad context. We also want to continue to share context with those existing dedicated efforts. I won't go through each of those. But we want to incorporate new learnings and keep what's going, know what's working, keep that going well, and deepen it even further. So it could be from our North Omaha engagement where efforts continue. To the next slide. Cass and Sarpy County continuing. To the next slide. To even efforts in K Junction Solar in York County, right, outside our service area, but it's still engaging customers and stakeholders in a way that we know that they want to, learn. Okay, and if you go to the next. It can be difficult to measure effectiveness and sharing context across 800,000 plus folks and across 13 counties. But we wanted to look at the data that we had in hand and see if we saw anything that would tell us how we were doing. And so you may be familiar with our JD Power residential survey. And within that, there's very specific categories and questions that point to just engagement. Within our communications section, there are about a half a dozen questions and 3 that we think very specifically point to how we do in communicating change. And so we took a look at that over the past year and said, how are we doing? And our goal is always to at least be above that Midwest mid-size average. And for context, I think we were ranked number 2 out of 16 in our comparative set, even within this section. But as you look at across the board, with blue being our Midwest mid-size average, OPPD has overperformed across 4 quarters in 3 areas. Efforts to develop supply plans for the future, right, which indicates, are we talking about projects at hand? People will only know about them if we are talking about them. Variety of communications used. Are we trying new things and trying to reach people in ways in which they prefer? And efforts to communicate changes, which would be customers' perceptions of if we are putting forth effort to communicate. And so you might see some dips and so on. I can assure you these kind of fall with like industry-wide dips. So though we always want to improve and look into it, we're proud that we keep performing above that Midwest mid-size average. Okay. And then finally, SD 13 calls on us to continuously evaluate and improve. And you'll see that we, put ourselves just barely into the green on this. And I think that that's, I hope, comes from a place of real humility, because as the world changes and as there are new ways of engaging and as people become more or less trusting, we have to be on our toes to really understand the best way to go about this. And so we think we're doing well in this area, but we always see opportunities for improvement. And we can talk about that. I'll talk about 2 improvements that we made last year, and then kind of a general approach to where we see deeper opportunity. So I would say over the last year or so, we've made strides in breadth of outreach, trying to get to more people. And our opportunity will be, how do we maintain that while also getting much deeper? So a couple of examples of improvement. On that top bar, the content available on projects in your neighborhood on OPPD.com. That's where most people think about when they see a sign or an OPPD pole. They want to know what's going on. Why is, part of my street torn up, or what's going on with the pole that's down? Thanks to collaboration with customer service and our GIS team, we'll soon be able to offer customers, it's really a brilliant and much deeper view, detailed view of the work that's going on in their neighborhood. We're really proud of that. I think it's going to be a game changer and should go live soon. We're also now trying to use our role in the community, because we feel so strongly about IEP2, to be leaders, because we exist to build thriving communities, and let's help share this practice with others so that we're using our voice and being an example of what that could look like. And so we've been invited to speak at regional events hosted in Omaha from IEP2, and then also participating in things like a Burns and McDonald symposium, where we also could learn from a regional level. Here's what we're doing. Let's share our best practices and let's learn. So we're just much more connected and thinking about outreach in a more mature way. The second band of the graphic shows how we're trying to proactively hear more voices. Right? We are proud of the voices that come to our meetings and that give us feedback, and we know that we're only hearing from a few. And so we want to proactively engage many more voices. So you've seen a campaign over the past year called It's Your Power. It was one designed not only to just raise awareness about what public power is, but really the call to action was to encourage folks to register on OPPD Community Connect. And even though it could be a little bit of a cumbersome process and the campaign is still wrapping up, we're already seeing a nearly 30% increase in Community Connect registrations over the length of the campaign. So if we ask people to stay engaged, they will. But it has to be a broad campaign, right? And we learn where people are showing up. And tailor our broad outreach that way. We're also continuing efforts to engage one of our fastest growing segments, our Spanish speaking communities. We've become much more consistent, offering both English and Spanish versions of information, graphics, posts. You may have recalled that from our storm restoration efforts. But what we're excited for is it should be this week, our first ever longitudinal study on customers who identify as Spanish speaking as launching. So that's different from a point in time study. It's with every transaction, anyone who is identifying as Spanish speaking, we're learning their preferences over time. And we have dedicated resources now, Rita Rodriguez on my team, who's integral in that effort and really helping us just understand where can we start to just begin building a deeper relationship. And we're proud of these efforts, but we always have opportunities to improve. This world that we talked about where there's fragmented and multiple ways to get information, and there's really sometimes a dearth of trust in the world means that it takes us just more time and resource and thought to build trust over time. And so we have to keep that breadth and we have to increase depth. We have to be present on all relevant channels, and we need to understand in detail the unique needs and desires of every customer and group that we serve. Trust is built, right? You consistently build relationships with people in the manner in which they prefer. And that takes time, information, and resources. We have some successes to celebrate. We know we're scratching the surface here. I'll just speak to a couple here. Continuing to make strides in our North Omaha community. So not only from deep conversations and continued conversations with leaders in that community, but even things like key partnerships with, this is DJ Mr. Soul. He is now like an OPPD real advocate for us, and he's been fantastic in helping spread the word in a way that felt really meaningful for the community. The next is York County, right? This was a new place, and we had to do a completely different approach. We needed to use a local center. We needed to do deep listening and education. And even if it's slow going, we continue to make strides there. And then another example would be with our Casta Sarpi project. Sounds like it's something that's so small, but has made a huge difference, is understanding the power of local community papers and journalism. And this Casgram, which they may call themselves rather modest, has a lot of power. And so through engaging with the Casgram and the folks who work there, placing ads and providing information, we've seen a lot more trust being built within the community. Again, we know that we are scratching the surface. Over the coming months, it's really going to be about maintaining breadth, increasing depth. And that might have to mean that we look at how we resource and staff, because it takes time. And we know that with roles like a new environmental justice coordinator, we'll be able to partner and get an even deeper understanding of what really matters in those communities. So yes, we will be deep, but we'll also be strategic in understanding key issues. So we look forward to that, and we look forward to updating you, next year on the time about how we've improved in that depth of relationship. It takes consistency, and we're excited to get started. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for their time listening to our work to uphold SD 13. And with that, we'll conclude with our recommendation that the board find OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance with board policy SD 13. And then we'll open up for questions and reflections.
Chair Howard?
Questions for Lisa or Kate and Lisa. I will say just props to Director Moody. The first round of slides that we got for this update was really limited, and he was like, no, you've done a lot more than what's reflected on these slides, and so you have a much more robust report because of that feedback, I think. But are there questions for Lisa or Kate? Any concerns about the recommendation?
Can I offer reflections?
Yes, I love that.
Well, first of all, with the number of projects that you have been dealing with, and yet you have high scores compared to the benchmark. And so I think your efforts to do all this are, if they're not constant, they're really near constant to make that all work. And I appreciate the transparency of the processes and the ways that you encourage customers to give feedback. I think that's really helpful. And I also appreciate very much your efforts to share the context around a given decision point or, something that we're gonna have to decide using all of these possible. I think that's really, really helpful for people. Multiple ways of learning, and what is it I used to hear? People don't hear what you say until you say it like the third time, and then they go, oh, I haven't heard that before. So you're just terrific work. Thank you.
Fantastic team.
Right, hearing no other concerns or questions or reflections, I think we're ready to move on. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Lisa. And that's all we have from CPE today.
Nothing more moving forward, Sarah?
I don't think so. We reflected.
Okay, just making sure. Great, thank you, appreciate it. Next committee is the Systems Management Nuclear Oversight Committee. Director Moody.
Here we go. Thank you, Director Williams. The Systems Management Nuclear Oversight Committee met on October 2nd. Note that that's about 2 weeks ago. The full committee was present. The items in note here, we will talk about number 3 here in a moment. 4 is going to thread into our conversation. 5 is going to thread into our conversation of 6. So the committee got an integrated resource plan review primarily because that piece is a little bit tethered to SD7 updates that we're going to be discussing later. So I won't go into detail on those. The only one that's worth noting in a chair's report is item number 4. The committee heard an update on the sourcing for the agreements to install the natural gas engines at Cass County Station and the expansion at Turtle Creek Station. That update included a variety of subjects, including the commercial progress the team has made, as well as setting some of the expectations for some coming milestones. So the committee has just got kind of a glimpse into it and is looking forward to sharing more information as the sourcing work concludes over the next quarter. So that's the long and short of it. Like I said, most of those items we're going to talk about here as we go through the agenda. So that concludes the chair's report, which means we are going to move on to the SD7 monitoring report. Mr. Fleener.
Thank you, Director Moody. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cliff Fleener, Vice President of Sustainability and Environmental Affairs for OPPD. It's my pleasure to talk about our SD7 monitoring report. Slide, please.
Technical difficulty.
Oh.
Can you talk without it for just a minute while I get it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know it by memory?
I don't know if everybody wants to hear me read all 7 right here before you, but while we're having these momentary technical difficulties, I'll just indicate that, remind everyone that SD7 that we're discussing during the monitoring report reflects the 2022 version. It does not reflect anything that we've been discussing prior for the current revisions. And also, I was going to mention that I wasn't going to go through each of the SDs in this first slide, but talk about each slide and the details involved. There is one slide where we talk about operate in an environmentally responsible manner. We have 3 slides covering that.
So you have the slides there. The board has the slide deck on diligence, so maybe you can continue.
I'll go ahead and
use through, and then for the benefit of the public, we'll put the slides if that's okay.
Excellent. And I will just talk starting off with green teams, which is the second slide. In the deck, this is where we're going to operate in an environmentally responsible manner and strive for continuous improvement of its environmental performance. Green teams are one of the most exciting things I think that we've begun to implement in 2023. We have 6 green teams out of 7 key sites established. These teams are small groups of local workers mentored by a member of my team and supported by our continuous improvement team to use their expertise and knowledge towards finding improvements both operationally through facilities and through procedures to reduce the amount of waste, impact to water and emissions at their facilities. I think I've seen these kinds of programs really succeed. It's borrowed from the automotive industry, and we will have our 7th team established by the end of this year at Nebraska City. Oh, there we go. Next slide, please. The second slide, dealing with the first item of our SD. This is on operational scope 1 carbon goal for mobile source emissions. We've embarked upon a feasibility study in 2023, and we've determined that our vehicle fleet could be rationalized over the next several years to improve our environmental performance. We believe it could save us about $1.3 million in expenses or reduce the scope 1 mobile source carbon footprint by about 40%. We're going to begin transitioning to 3 key fuels, transitioning selected smaller internal combustion engines to electric, mid-range to propane, and then retain and increase the number of diesels in our fleet. And that's how we intend to drive these initial improvements. We have a fairly long timeline, so we'll take advantage of improvements in technology as we move forward. This will also enhance the working environment for our employees, as well as improve efficiency, and is systematically measurable. In subsequent reports, you'll see our progress year to year with a specific written goal. Next slide, please. This is the third and final one, dealing with environmental responsible behavior. This is our operational goal for waste diversion. We set a goal by 2030 based on the feasibility conducted in 2023 to increase our diversion to landfill from 21% to 40%. We've drafted a waste recycling standard in 2023, and we're conducting a feasibility study in 2023 was conducted as well to target our most difficult recyclables, such as tires, wooden reels, and ceramics. We have shifted to a new recycling vendor that provides us more transparent information as to the fate of our recyclables to ensure that what gets recycled actually gets recycled as opposed to landfill or shipped overseas. And we've, thanks to the green teams, we've partnered with a mobile waste compactor that will reduce the number of OPPD waste falls by half. And this also reduces our carbon impact. Another item yielded by the Nebraska City green team was the establishment of new replacement of water coolers with on-site RO systems, which is reduce the use of plastic bottles. And we've got an education program recycling focusing on outside of our major industrial items like poles and steel, focused on aluminum, cardboard, and paper, and emphasizing the direct disposal of plastics, as we found from our research that most of the plastics that we recycle actually don't get recycled. So for this point, we're encouraging their landfill, lower carbon footprint, safer than having them shipped around the country and overseas. Those are the 3 slides we have on our initial item. Let's go to conduct operations in a manner that strives for the goal of net zero carbon production by 2050. The chart here indicates our overall carbon footprint, scopes 1, 2, and 3. Scope 1 is reflected in orange. That's mainly our production fleet. Scope 2, very tiny, little tiny orange line. Scope 3 is the blue item. We've gone from 16 million tons of carbon emissions from all sources in 2013 to approximately 10 million tons as of the end of 2023. Tiny amount, 18,000 of that was due to improvement in scope 3 emissions, mostly through the green of the grid, additional power purchase agreements. The major reason for the decline in scope 1 was the transition of units 1, 2, and 3 at North Omaha in 2016. And there were a couple of significant outages in Nebraska City in 2023, which resulted in the slight drop in overall carbon emissions. Overall, 40.6% reduction since 2013. Next slide, please. Our next item is to conduct our business in a manner that meets all environmental regulatory standards and goes beyond compliance where practicable. You know, we have to meet a variety of regulatory requirements ranging from US EPA, the Fish and Parks Department here in Nebraska, City of Omaha, US Fish and Wildlife Service, among many others. In 2023, no violation of environmental permits resulting in fines or enforcement actions at the site. We have a robust internal audit program managed by my colleague, Vice President Foch, which I love working with. It's incredibly helpful to work with those auditors. We appreciate weaknesses or chinks in the army, if you will, so that we can correct it. We had 17 environmental site inspections during the period of 2023. In fact, right now, the city is observing stack testing at North Omaha currently. We have a very constant and regular regime of inspections. And we have a growing sustainability environmental program with 2 recent hires. We've added our EJ coordinator, who joined us just 2 weeks ago, already involved in signing decisions around North Omaha. And we included another environmental specialist. And we'll be hiring a site coordinator to support our largest sites, our highest risk sites, Nebraska City and North Omaha, hopefully here in the next few weeks. Next slide, please. Oh, incidentally, that's the sensitive briar. My team wanted me to let you know that that is from one of our Prairies of Progress locations on the previous slide. Next slide, please. Our next item is to be transparent by measuring and reporting environmental performance on OPPD's website. This is just a screenshot of what's currently available at www.oppd.com/environment. We had total number of views in 2023 of about 10,600. Unique page views, 6,500 people total. Got a lot of got a lot of attention. We're going to be working very closely with Lisa Olson's team to develop our first sustainability report, which I hope to streamline communications and help us deliver this information to the community more effectively, as well as providing data tables and supporting documentation. So that's something we're currently working on. So look forward to talking more about that in 2024. Next slide, please. All right, engage customers and stakeholders to promote energy conservation and efficiency and minimize environmental impact. Just a quick note on customer-owned generation. As you see, growth in 2024 started to level off. We think that's a result of both early adopters sort of hitting saturation, as well as an increase in interest rates. The Greener Together program, 3 projects in progress, 3 completed. They represented a disposition of about $404,000 of material funds delivered to the community to help support those. Some of the things include Habitat for Humanity work, no more empty pots initiatives, free farm syndicates, etc. The energy education program, many of you have seen Mr. Eric Ben Salah, wonderful gentleman with his orange suit. He's delivered over 2,000, reached over 2,000 students in 2023, expect to do a little bit more than that in 2024, and currently a number of teacher workshops that have reached 113 teachers in the 2023 time period. So a lot of great activity. This is kind of the tip of the iceberg, but got a lot of great activity over the years on this item. Let's move to the next slide, please. I love this picture. Do not be alarmed. Dr. Moloff did not pinch her fingers in the giant scissors you see there. She is in fact just really, really happy to open our 81 megawatt solar field at Platteview. Javier, clearly smiling. If she had cut it, he would be ready.
I was safe.
He was safe at that point. Our wonderful government affairs team has made numerous educational update presentations to submit letters of support for renewable energy at local, state, and county governments. They have participated in the Nebraska Planning and Zoning Conference in March, covering battery storage and a host of other key initiatives in sustainability. We also had a lot of great outreach to the Otoe County Board supporting the expansion of the landfill at Nebraska City. The next step after that will be take it forward to Nebraska Department of Energy and Environment for approval. And then we've engaged with multiple IRA and IIJ funding opportunities, Grid Smart grants, Grant Innovation grants as an example. All of our federal grants all go through Justice 40 screenings as well, as maybe already know. A lot of really exciting things in this area. So we believe these activities support our SD clause to advocate and educate local, state, and federal governments to protect and promote OPPD's environmental impact. Next, this is our stage gates. We talked a little about this in June. We're going to use this to measure progress. This key clause to our SD7 is by year end 2027, achieve an approximate 3.5 million ton annual reduction in CO2 emissions at the North Omaha station site relative to OPPD's 2013 benchmark of 3.9 million tons at the station. Our first stage gate that we've listed, and the stage gate is not per se a detailed plan. It's not a spreadsheet. There are literally hundreds of individual subtasks that have to be completed. It's more of a gate or a couple of key items that can show progress to the community as we begin to transition that key facility. And the first stage gate, which we have on here, is by the end of Q2 2025. The SPP, that's the Southwest Power Pool's General Interconnection Agreement study approved without major transmission build-outs, and the operation and completion of Turtle Creek Station and Standing Bear Lake Station will be completed. That's not to say that they would just be completed. Those 2 stations will be running by the end of Q2. They will need to be operating. They expect to be online by the close of this year. Both of those sites. When that happens by end of Q2, the dot you see that's green will go full green. If one of those is not accomplished, it will go red. And then we'll have to go back and discuss any changes. The next stage gate would be Q4 of 2025. That's the North Omaha Station 4 and 5 conversion RFP, and contract is awarded. When that is complete, you would then get a green light for that to proceed. And the third is the North Omaha Station retirement and replacement study completion and approved by Southwest Power Pool. And then you get the final green light, and then you move into closure. We were going to include an additional one, which is the submittal of the SPP GIA study, but that has already been completed. So we've got to restart from where we are right now, but then we actually, that's already been completed. Next slide, please. Here's our recommendation. Before we move forward, I just wanted to thank all the contributors to this report and all the people I've worked with across all of the business units. It's been really a remarkable year and a half for me. I really enjoyed working with the folks here, and this is certainly not a reflection of my hard work. It's a reflection of all the hard work and collaboration that we've had across the board. Our recommendation, as was brought forth from the Systems Committee, is to approve SD7. So as we consider the recommendation, we'll move on to the next slide. And then I would invite Chairman Moody to make any comments or considerations with regards to this recommendation.
Thank you, Cliff. Let's go back a slide if we can and focus on the recommendation, then we'll do reflections. So I guess I'll just colleagues turn over to you to see what, if any, questions you have about the presentation.
I have some. Get back to the first one. In the first, I would say bucket, the operating in an environmentally responsible manner. Can you provide some examples of what types of programs the green teams have developed and implemented so far?
Well, the one is the crusher. The crushing was one. The second was the water bottle replacement. Getting rid of plastic water bottles was the other item. Again, that's a pretty local, pretty small area, but that's an example of the first two programs they've initiated on. We have a sustainability playbook and a mentor that will help them develop projects from that. And we also be rolling out our sustainability award, which will get some friendly competition going between the sites to see who can develop a better program within the parameters that we're trying.
So thank you. About the vehicle fleet, what percentage of our fleet is now all electric?
It's a very small percentage. That's what I can say, very small percentage. That's why we want to focus on creating all electrics. But within this, what we found with our studies and our research is a lot of small vehicles, people movers that are maybe now, say, Kawasaki gasoline mules, very expensive to maintain. There are electric equivalents, four-wheel drive that look identical, that will save quite a bit of money for us in maintenance costs and also provide a safer, healthier environment for the worker because these things are driving around facilities, close quarters, etc. So that's where our focus is. There's a handful of all electrics, but it's very, very tiny.
There's something important here is also when we're talking about a passenger fleet, you're right, Cliff, very few of them are full electric, quite a few of them are hybrids. When you look at the entirety of our fleet, that includes bucket trucks and larger vehicles, that gets a little harder. And that's where you're talking about the medium-sized vehicles and converting gasoline to diesel on some vehicles where electric is not quite feasible, but you can still achieve significant reductions.
Yeah.
Yet.
Okay, awesome, very good. I know years ago we used to report on carbon intensity, so amount of carbon for the amount of electricity and kilowatt hours that we produce. I don't think that that's been included in this report in the last couple of years. Can you remind me why that is?
We wanted to shift to a more of a net zero approach. We are tracking a normalized number, if you will, for that, and we can certainly report it in subsequent meetings. But with net zero, it's more of a measure of netting overall. You can use offsets and other things in that area. So we shifted away from a normalized number. We still track it, we still create it, but we felt with the net zero piece, it was more effective to use, bars that incorporate offsets as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that was an SD7 revision, right? The board originally asked us
Yeah,
to
we
report,
used to have an intensity number.
and then we
in
struck it out, or the board struck it out. And
Well, let me thread on that for a moment. I mean, I'm going to differentiate for a moment between some of our customer classes. Some of our industrial customers are able and are taking action to go and procure their own renewable energy all over the place, right? And so they've got a mechanism by which they can do that. And we've got interesting partnerships with them to accelerate some of that action. And then you've got other segments of the customer class, commercial and residential for that matter, who just don't have the wherewithal to do that. They don't have the capital. And so it's a curiosity question of mine with respect to some of the things that we've done recently, some of the announcements that we've made for some pretty significant renewable energy activities, and whether or not that is aiding some of those other customers who are using that metric as the way in which it calculates its scope 2 emissions. And I just don't know if activity A with, a large customer results in and is benefiting others, or if it's slowing down the transition that we're making and reducing those scope 2 emissions. Does any of that make sense whatsoever?
I could just add, because this is an important part. When we came in, we started providing our customers with e-grid numbers.
Yep.
as opposed to us calculating individual carbon footprint, because frankly, E-grid has been found to be a more accurate reflection of what the actual electricity or actually embedded carbon in the electricity that you consume. And the difference between, we're slightly above that, but just by a smidge. And as we continue to add more PPAs and green our scope 3, we're contributing to the wider improvements across SPP, which influences E-grid. And we're also lowering. And if you look, I've been using E-grid for about a decade plus. It's kind of the easy in the United States, at least. It's not the same in Europe because it's going the opposite direction there. But in the US, it's been declining. The electricity embedded carbon is solid since I think 2000, 2008. You know, because I remember scratching my head in past lives going, well, how did that improvement happen? Oh my gosh, E-grids, you know, the scores have been going down and they're calculated by a third party. So I don't know if that answers your question or explains how our approach is. It simplifies it, I think, for us. And it's got the credibility of being done by EP on an annual basis too.
But maybe to your point and what Director Buckner referred to on carbon intensity, this is, in my opinion, one of the most important aspects of our sustainability strategy, which is the board clearly has asked us to focus on carbon emission reductions. That's the 0 by 2050. The net 0 by 2050 starts addressing a little bit of that carbon intensity. Say, how else are we netting, right? From our perspective, we've been adding a ton of new megawatts and megawatt hours to our operations in the past few years, breaking records every single year, right? We're serving a lot more load. We're serving a lot more customers, a lot more meters. And we haven't increased our emissions. In fact, our emissions have decreased. Now, there's still a long ways to go, and we're going to talk about that here on the next topic. But it's important, I think, to get credit for the fact that we are accommodating all of this growth without the commensurate growth in emissions. Yeah. Part of it is shifting from coal to natural gas. All the PPAs, all the renewables that we're bringing on the grid. But I welcome this conversation because I believe that this is truly giving credit where credit is due. It's to us, to our customers, to the manufacturers of new technology that are enabling us to grow at the same time as we're reducing carbon emissions, which to me is just a double win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, in terms of the monitor report, I think it's a good question. And I don't know that it's just, perhaps it's something that we can discuss as a committee with respect to how we continue to enhance the monitor report going forward, but nothing more than that for today.
And I think it's great, if I may, I think it's great to have it just to track.
Yeah.
And it's just a confirmation of seeing how you're performing it from a slightly different lens, efficiency lens, so.
Yeah, another data point.
Yep.
Okay, great.
All right, I have a couple more.
Yeah, keep going.
Unless you want to thread on.
Yeah, sorry, on that point, we've talked before about RECs and the way in which some companies or customers are looking to specifically receive credit for clean energy for their direct consumption. And I don't know how complicated it is to try and provide some additional clarity on how that is impacting attribution of clean energy within, I mean, I know we don't talk about individual customers, but like classes or something like that, because again, if we sell the RECs to a particular customer, that means that none of the other customers can take credit for the renewable energy associated with those RECs. And so it is essentially shifting who gets to say that their energy is clean. And I don't know if that's something that, do you have any thoughts about that, the way that that's presented?
First of all, this is the 2023 period. So next year's, my hope, my intent is that next year's will look different, be much more aligned, obviously, to whatever the board decides on USD. And we have a way, once that's in place, that track that reflects what RECs are applied to what. Generally speaking, as we talked about RECs before, the ones you receive that are monetizing, we're spending that on increased reductions. And when you use E-grid to provide carbon footprint, that's independent from any of that. That gives people an accurate reflection of what the typical consumer, the typical individual that might be calculated, that's not buying a REC or an attribute, gets the advantage of that accepted calculation, or accepted number to determine their carbon input, and they will continue to benefit from that going forward.
Yeah, can you remind us, the REC program began at the beginning of this year, February?
It was roughly then.
Roughly about that time frame.
Okay, great. So then, yeah, appropriate question for next time this report is up, to have more detail on the way in which RECs are impacting the way that customer classes, not individual customers again, but customer classes, or broadly, we understand the attribution of the non-emitting resources relative to the other resources.
We will be talking, I was gonna put it here, but I so we'll just deal with that and we'll start fresh with the new SD and with that next year, so.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's great. Good thread. Any other threads on that? Okay, Amanda, go.
All right, so you mentioned, and I think we've talked about this before, but I just need a reminder. You just filled an environmental justice position.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about the roles and responsibilities of that position, because certainly we're looking to add language to SD7 about that, and so this is a little proactive.
Well, great.
I appreciate
Let me talk about, we just added her about a week ago. She's getting just acclimated. Her first task, once she gets through this initial month or so, is start working on a gap assessment and benchmarking for us. The tier of our approach is first to look at what is our regulatory obligations under federal law for environmental justice, to do a review for that. Then how can we gauge and assess our impact and effect and identify the impacted communities or communities around our facilities, both rural and urban, to see what's out there and available, and look at what other similar utilities are doing. And we're going to look at Dominion, TVA, SMUD as examples of that we're going to benchmark again to build on an appropriate program. So to a certain extent, what we come up through the gap assessment and through the benchmarking is going to determine more fully. But broadly, it'll be three broad buckets. One is federal requirements, which should be very straightforward. Identifying, our demographics or what have you, or impacted communities by financial as opposed to racial categorization, and then looking at how we can do to assist and insert environmental justice into decision-making reviews internally. So we're citing or improvements, adding batteries, adding new generation, et cetera.
Thank you. I think that was my question. Oh, one more. I think in past reports, we've usually reported demand side management numbers and how many megawatts are enrolled in those types of programs. I know that also comes up in another monitoring report, but I know it was something that we've seen before in SD7.
We have some listing of that, I believe, on, excuse me a minute. We not talk about that a little bit on, stop using paper. Combustor own generation on, and slower growth, that piece. I can tell you what we're going to do next year. We're going to have a scope 3 goal that's going to look at reducing carbon footprint for our downstream customers. And then we'll have something that maybe be more satisfactory.
Okay.
Director Bogner, I think that shift in discussion came as we revised SD9 and around the tranche of generation types.
Okay.
And we added there a target of 32 megawatts of additional demand side.
And you'll report out when we have that on it. Okay. All right. Perfect. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Director Bogner. Any other questions, colleagues?
Couple things on the very end there on the North Omaha transition. We talked about the first stage gate, 2025. I just want to make sure I understand correctly. The timeline on the new resources coming online is still aligned with what we've got shown on the slide, correct?
As far as the SD directive, yes, that's still the goal.
Okay. Yeah, glad to hear it. And then secondly, same topic. We had a discussion about customer growth this morning in closed session without any specifics. Would anything in the customer growth expectations lead to any potential changes in the timeline on the transition in North Omaha Station?
No, the gates you see here are the key items that will cross. It's right now, the first gate is getting approval from SPP to make these transition without major transition build out, which is required, which would be dictated by Southwest Power Pool, not necessarily.
And let me just double down on that. I think, so the answer is no. None of the new customer growth is affecting the transition into North Omaha. And I can say that with a straight face, and I'm very confident because the board has demonstrated time and again that when we're dealing with growth and we're looking at load growth, the board has approved a new generation for us to continue to build and meet that growth. Were it not for that, we would have to figure out what else do we do to meet that load growth. So two things happen. One is the stage gate that Cliff has here on the screen. Those are still on target, not without risks and not without a lot of work by a lot of people trying to get to those stage gates, but right now. We're confident that we will meet that first stage gate. But also, I do want to point out to the board's track record on approving new generation. That is allowing us to meet the new growth without having to compromise and go back and figure out what do we do with the plants we already have. So that's a very important piece that allows us to move forward with load growth and not jeopardize the plans for North Omaha conversion.
Great.
So, so the two critical paths, one is approval by SPP on a couple things, right? And the actual execution of the work at North Omaha that allows the conversion to happen, much of which has already started. So lots of things in motion, ox boiler added. We have burners to switch out later. But those are your two critical paths, is your SPP approval and get completed. Right now, those seem to be.
So let me double down on that for the public and just make sure that we understand that there is already work happening. There's already work that happened last year or earlier this year that's already in place today at North Omaha Station that wouldn't be there were it not for the transition from coal to natural gas. For example, as in the turbine deck, as that deck will not be on all the time. Once we decommission 1, 2, and 3, and 4 and 5 are on gas, that turbine deck is not going to be on all the time. Well, it needs a source of heat for things not to freeze over, right? Right now, we're using the plant's own heat helps the plant not to freeze. So we now have a boiler installed already inside the turbine deck, ready to be fired up, or it's an electric boiler that will help those two turbines to remain at acceptable temperatures once we make the transition. So that's important for the public. You can't see it from the outside, but there are already modifications happening inside of the station, getting us ready for that conversion.
Yeah, and as a reminder to anybody who has additional questions, we have seen it from the inside. We've seen pictures in monthly, quarterly, or monthly and quarterly reports on North Omaha Station conversion at this meeting, available in previous board meetings. I'll refer people that when they have questions.
Thank you.
I appreciate the clarification on this. Just want to make sure that everybody who has questions knows that there is information publicly available. We've talked about it a number of times. Thanks.
You good on that one? Director? Yep. Okay. Other questions, colleagues, on the monitor report? Okay. Any reflections on what's been accomplished, challenges, or strategic implications? And naturally, this is going to roll into our SD7 update, so let's not overcomplicate it, y'all. But any reflections anyone wants to offer?
I just want to say over 10 years for a 40% reduction to occur is impressive.
Yeah.
And it's not without work and diligence and effort. And so I want to make sure that y'all recognize what you've done, and that's awesome. So the next 40% will be harder.
I'm sorry, Mary.
I was just going to say, I want to commend OPPD's governmental affairs team, as was outlined here. There's so much work being done, whether it's a meeting with the community to say, hey, we need a new ash pit. Here's our process. We want your input. We want to let you know we want to do this in a way that everybody's going to be okay with, and all the letters of support and encouragement to local county zoning boards and things like that to help OPPD serve load. It's impressive. Very impressive. Thank you.
If I may, just one quick comment that sparked by your comment, Director Buckner. These really belongs on SD9, but I think it's important for me to mention it here. I was reviewing some slides that I'm going to present next week at the Wind and Solar Conference, the Nebraska Wind and Solar Conference, and in there it was very clear, and I'm going to report out that even though it's not a requirement for SD7, percent of renewables, we moved away from that, and now we're focused on carbon emissions. I think it's important for me to report out in 2024 alone, between Flatview Solar, High Banks Wind, and Milligan Wind, 3 PPAs, 3 contracts we have of facilities that are already operating. We have more than doubled our renewable portfolio resources. We went from 971 megawatts to now 1,980 some megawatts in 1 year. So talk about really reflecting on the amount of change. The changes, the 40% reductions of CO2 from 2013 to today. And just in 1 year, it's work that took several years to happen, but we can celebrate in 2024, we've more than doubled the fleet of our renewable generation portfolio, which is enormous. It helps significantly with SE7 and SE9 on resource adequacy. So just something that was fresh in my mind from reviewing these slides this morning. Like, I think it's something worth celebrating.
Yep.
It doesn't happen overnight. It's a lot of work.
I wish it could happen overnight.
Yes.
Okay, other reflections?
I would have less gray hair if that was.
I think we talked at the workshop about giving the team, non-board members, so ELT, an opportunity to do any reflections and strategic. So anything that you want, again, we're going to talk at SD7 here in a minute, but anything more that you want to offer from a reflection standpoint?
I just think the work that we're doing right now is really moving us in the direction of a cleaner world. And really, it's part of that broader vision. And I see increasingly as we move through this process and this revisions that are before the coming, we're getting closer on that path. And I find it helpful and satisfying.
A cleaner world, not a fleaner world.
Thank you, Javier.
In all seriousness, you know what, I really appreciate the conversation around the carbon intensity. It's not currently codified in here, and we'll have conversations about revisions of Z7. I'm not suggesting we need that, but I think bringing that back up every now and then and really reflecting on how much we're growing, the additional gigawatts that we're serving, and how that compares to our emission profiles. I think that is something that's important for the team, and to the end that we can report this back to the board. I think it'll be helpful to us in our internal operation.
Yeah, given the growth especially, yeah.
Yep.
And I have an idea for you that we'll talk about offline.
Perfect. Craig, sorry, just looking forward, I mentioned my interest in the accounting and transparency about the rec program in the future. So I guess that's not a policy language change, but for the next year monitoring report, that is something I hope we'll see more.
I think that's right.
Want to make sure that I was clear about.
I think both of those two things are go forward items for the monitoring report.
I don't know. I guess I don't know how we capture those things from.
I think Cliff's probably got it.
Yeah, we've got an internal auditing procedure already put in place, data management procedure that are already drafting. There will be independent audit, but every 5 years, separate third-party auditing, internal auditing. I mean, I agree with you. I want the program to have absolute integrity, and every sustainability program I've ever been with, we make sure there's auditing regime for carbon emissions and RECs and everything. That's one thing that used to always keep me up at night, still does, is sending bad data out to the public. So
yeah. So the committee will own it, but Cliff will have it as part of the committee.
Okay. Next year's systems committee. There we go.
Yeah. Can I weigh in here just a minute? So I really appreciate this, Cliff, and I really like the graph that shows that we're continuing to decrease in CO2 emissions. I was thinking that in previous reports, we had also included other types of emissions that come from the burning of coal and gas, and I didn't see any of that in this report, and I was looking back through it again just to make sure I didn't miss it. But mercury, NOx, SOx, all the other things that come along with the emissions, are we not tracking that, or is that just not included in this report?
we are tracking them. In fact, I believe that Jeremy could correct me, 90% reduction in mercury. 90% reduction in mercury since 2016 from the emissions from our coal plants.
All of that is included. It's in OPPD.com, so it's publicly we reported. But to your point, Director Mulhove, it's a good opportunity for us to remind the board and the public during this monitoring report in the future. It's information we provide already, but there's opportunity to provide it again here in this report.
Yeah, I just think it's important to show that we really do care about people's health and more than as if climate change isn't enough. We certainly are concerned about people's health and well-being, and we're not, just randomly dumping toxic emissions on neighborhoods because we don't care. So I think it's important to show that along with the CO2, we're decreasing the other emissions that we're producing. So
That's great, Janice. I think note for next year, maybe just in the appendix, and we don't have to go through each one each.
Absolutely.
Okay. Great comment. Anything else, Janice?
no, again, thanks Cliff for, for the work in consolidating all this information. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Hall.
Okay, ask ELT for any reflections. Anything more?
I really appreciate how the electric system is talked about in this setting. It's a very systemic. I said it's governed by contracts and tariffs and all sorts of things that take careers to understand many times. And for Cliff to go to a stage gating on North Omaha to try and make it practical and to intentionally inject in this dynamic that there are some things we subject ourselves to as a matter of federal law. And we're happy to do those things, and making that come alive, I think, in a way that is sort of halfway easy to understand. I guess if I could characterize it that way, I think is a significant improvement. I just think that was really effective.
Great, thank you.
We talk a lot about the emissions piece of it. You hit on it earlier. I think Cliff's doing a nice job of trying to spur excitement in our centers, our plants, and those type of places to continue to do better in that space. I know it doesn't get as much attention, but I think that's important because, changing the hearts and minds and getting people engaged is a big deal, from a culture standpoint. You're doing a nice job in that.
And I would just say it's never been easier here. It usually takes me a couple of years to talk people into this is something worth doing. But at every site we've been to, regardless of its type, we've had at least several people eager to participate in these green teams to put the time in and a lot of enthusiasm. So I think that goes to the culture of OPPD at the grassroots level, which I think is important.
That's great. Okay. Okay. Seen on SD7 monitor report. That's great. Good reflections. I'm moving on to SD7.
I was just going to tee up the couple slides and turn it over. Good. Okay, let's go to the next one just quickly. All right, let's go to the first slide.
Greg, sorry, I apologize, Greg and Cliff. Can we take 5 minutes?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure.
About an hour and a half. And there was a request. So.
Yeah, I had momentum. Sorry, let's take a break.
Thank you.
Okay. Director. Cleaner.
Okay, great. I just have a couple, please. Just a couple comments on process and the results of the public comment period. So next slide regarding SD7 and the revisions. First of all, I think we're currently in step 6 and 8, final step before a recommendation or a return to committee for discussion. I think this process has been going on now for at least 7 or 8 months, reflects a lot of hard work by the staff internally, a lot of deliberation by the systems committee, and a lot of public comment both in and out of the public comment period. Next slide, please. Okay, the public comment period was September 19th to October the 13th. This markup, we have a different markup in a couple of slides. It's easier to read. The red line obviously reflects the immense amount of change and the significant positive change that has been proposed for SD7. We'll cover the results on the next slide, please. Board feedback, we added the environmental justice component, added an early majority component to SD7, and future interim metrics to be informed and determined by the 2026 Integrated Resource Plan. They're posted on Community Connect, 18 comments on Community Connect, 42 emails sent via board contact page. Vast majority appreciate the addition of the environmental justice language that was included. A lot of other comments on interim metrics as well. Next slide. So at this point, this the yellow reflects the changes, suggested changes to SD7. At this point, I would just ask that turn it over to Director Moody for consideration regarding clarification, anything that's especially liked, and any other questions that should be raised before any decisions are made by the board or the systems committee. So I would turn it over to Director Moody.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Fleener. Okay, colleagues, a couple of things to note here. We've talked about the sequence. So one of the things I made the point earlier when I did my chair's report that the committee met on October 2nd. But the comment period ended on October 13th, I think, or something like that. So point being, there were only a few comments that had come in by that point. So the committee didn't have the luxury of being able to sit with all of it together as a group and have a meaningful conversation. So we're absent that opportunity today. Nevertheless, we're going to do it as a group rather than as a committee. So I wanted to point that out, that the committee doesn't have anything formal to sort of set in front of you that is its recommendation for next steps. Cliff hit on a couple things with respect to the comments that did come in. I want to underscore a few things. As he said, there was pretty widespread support for the inclusion of environmental justice. And I would also acknowledge that there were some references and suggestions for how we might improve that. Which was really helpful, quite honestly, because it's a growing and evolving topic, both within the walls and outside of the walls of OPPD. So those comments were extremely helpful. I think we all also saw many references of support for our efforts to reduce emissions and continue to reduce emissions, be that by increasing our use of renewables, reduction of fossil fuels, or whatever those other mechanisms might be. So there was widespread support there. Also a handful of comments encouraging energy efficiency and distributed energy resources. And then the last one that I'll note, thematically speaking, was support for the inclusion of interim metrics, which is something that talk a little bit more about today. Before we get into board comments, I do want to linger for a moment on the IRP. Because as it currently stands, the whole reason why we started this revision process is because there was a collective desire on the board for interim metrics. And yet, the current version has the 2026 number that we've talked about many times. That's the North Omaha. But beyond that, we've essentially put a placeholder there that says we're going to go through the IRP process, and we'll allow that to inform. So I think the systems committee, when we met, got a little bit of a glimpse into what the IRP process might look like, what it has looked like historically. But because we're placing such a high priority on that to inform what our metric might be, I want to make sure that we have an understanding for what that looks like and what the board's role is on it. We don't have a formal presentation. I only briefly gave Javier a heads up that we wanted to make sure that this was part of the conversation. So I'll name a couple things, and then I'll look to the team to kind of fill in some gaps here based on what I ascertained through the discussion. My understanding when I looked at my notes is that from a timeline standpoint, generally start mid to late 2025 and have it filed in late 26. And check me if I'm wrong on any of this stuff. There's an extensive public involvement process. There was 5 years ago. I would expect that the exact same thing, if not potentially more robust, because we just got through SD13, right? So I would expect a pretty extensive public involvement process that would be included. And then with respect to the board involvement in the process, I think this is part of what I want to make sure we have a good understanding for. Naturally, we have the opportunity to attend any and all public engagement opportunities, to be sure. And I think the other thing that I think was really important that I noted, and at the risk of stating the obvious, the strategic directives are probably the principal way by which the board informs the direction that the utility is going, which would also include informing the IRP. We've not historically had any formal role in approving any IRP. And I know that was something that I think a few of you were curious about, whether or not that's worthwhile, possible, valuable in any way, shape, or form. So I think that's part of what I think we should start to understand, is whether or not that's something in lieu of an interim metric. I think a lot of us view an interim metric. I think that the juiciest thing about it from the board standpoint was it provides really good direction to the team when it goes into the IRP process. And so if we're absent that, then I think the board kind of goes, okay, what are the other ways in which we have a voice And not in dictating results necessarily, but in informing and guiding results. So those are that's the framework and the outline of maybe what I think from an IRP standpoint, we were interested in. Maybe I'll kind of look into Brad and Javier simultaneously here to see if you've got any thoughts on, I think most importantly for us, board involvement in the process, and then any thoughts that you might have on, if it makes sense, what value or what does it detract board approval of the IRP when it comes to it.
I'll touch on the last one.
Okay.
First, and then Brad, because he has a lot more visibility into the process and his team. But from my perspective, so technically speaking, we don't have to do an IRP. I think it's a best practice. I think it's a great tool. But the only requirement we have is as we get allocations of hydroelectric power from the Western Area Power Administration, we have that requirement to file an IRP no later than every 5 years. Be earlier, but not later than 5 years. Getting a board approval, it's not a requirement to file that IRP. It may necessitate us making a few changes to allow for enough discussion, debate, board approval before we file that. That's not an impediment. From where I sit, and I'm going to reflect back to August of last year, where the board approved a near-term generation resolution, 2.5 gigawatts of new generation. That was a very consequential resolution, right? There was a lot of debate and discussion. There was some feedback from the board saying, "Hey, I wish I had known about these longer ago." We can debate and discuss that. I think whether 6 months was enough or 8 months was enough. I think having the board being part of developing the IRP, whether it's in an informal or formal way by approving the IRP, will go a long way in saying you've been part of the process all along. I'm not suggesting the board wasn't part of the process last time, but I think we have an opportunity to make it even more visible, more tangible, having the board's voice as well as stakeholders' voice inform the IRP. We'll have similar discussions as we had last time with E3 and pathways to decarbonization, all the way to including potentially if the board decides you want to have an official voice in approving the IRP, we'll have to figure out the logistics around that. But that would make that IRP, make no mistake in my mind, and I don't know exactly what is going to come out of that IRP, but I'm pretty sure that that IRP is going to signal a new set of investments that eventually is going to have to come back to the board to approve. So if you get to approve that IRP, in my mind, it's going to make it a lot easier for you than to approve than the actual projects that will materialize as that IRP. So I see a lot of benefit in that alignment. Some negatives in that it'll take more time, but we can figure that out.
Yeah.
That helps. I don't know, Brad.
Yeah, great summary. I don't obviously have anything to offer on those items other than I might just illuminate kind of the pathways to decarbonization work was our primary interaction with customers and stakeholders. Last IRP. We kind of went through a 6-step process where we kind of did a 101. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's why we're trying to do it, and really sort of illuminate what's going on. And then we talked about the approach we were going to take and the inputs that we put into it. And we laid this out, maybe to Javier's point, for as much advanced visibility as we could give customers and interested participants. And then we kind of executed against that. And that seemed to get pretty good feedback from, I think, the data that Ms. Olson collected on people's experience and their awareness around what was happening and why it was happening. And I think we have some brief history going back to the 2021 IRP where we had a little wind. And then shortly after that, we had a power with purpose that had a whole lot of solar. And so I think maybe those are some of the things that Javier was trying to illuminate, that you can get yourself in those kinds of situations, and then you kind of have to think through tactically, how do we navigate that from a resolution perspective? So nothing we can't talk about, but just to illuminate that a little bit further.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'll look to colleagues as we're talking about our IRP process, what other questions you all have for the team with respect to the process?
I'll just ask a question because I think that it's important to talk about this publicly and clarify it for our stakeholders. The decarbonization study was a point in time. And there were certain assumptions about load growth and technology availability and things that went into that. Articulate for me and others why the results of that study are not maybe valid or not entirely valid for our current state and what we think our next 5 to 10 years will look like, because there has been a lot of change.
Yeah, excellent question. I feel the weight of trying to characterize that and let my finger kind of go on that. I think there's kind of two ways for folks to think about that very good question. And one is, what does your system need? And we usually talk about that in terms of load and who would like service and how much service do they want, and where do they want service, and what are the implications to us being able to operate a predictable system based on the resources that we have now and the incremental load and where we need to try and go. And we do that very methodically to make sure we get predictable outcomes, as I know the room is very familiar with. And so that's kind of one side of it. And the other side of it is this technology availability conversation. And, I have a vantage point on the future. It's admittedly imperfect. But right now we have an enormous amount of activity around future technologies and the types of things that the DOE is trying to advance, and other third-party providers for various types of assets and technologies that maybe aren't at scale right now, but they're working very, very hard to commercialize and bring to market. And I think that's kind of the other half of my answer is, what's going to be out there for us in the future that we could thoughtfully utilize based on what all the SDs are requiring as far as the service we need to deliver. And so we have groups of people that are very excited about that. How will those things mature and progress, and how should we think about them, and how should we talk about them with our community, and how do we level the playing field of information? And I think that was a lot of the positive comments we got back in the pathways was how do we have this really collaborative sort of interaction? So
let me just thank you for that very clearly here. So the pathways to decarbonization started in 2019. Really, the bulk of the work happened in 2020, 2021. This thing started before even what COVID meant. It's just some context around it. Since then, so the study was developed. We did our own study, our IRP. There are 5 very major changes that we have today that we didn't have back then. And I can already tell you there will be 5 more changes that we'll have 5 years from now. We can't even begin to imagine right now. First, supply chain disruptions that happened with COVID, but they're still today continue to happen today. So that the availability of material, either it's turbines, transformers, generators, solar panels, you name it. I mean, that supply chain really hasn't been completely restored. That slowed things down significantly. It started increasing cost. Cost is the second one. Cost has increased significantly on all fronts, not just in solar panels, windmills, but also on natural gas facilities with transformers. So that the cost of electrification has increased significantly. But let me be very clear that it's not just on one technology alone. It has risen. The tide has risen everywhere. That's part of the inflationary period that we've been living for the past 36 months. Third, land use planning and zoning has been increasingly hard, right? So the plan on paper is very different than the actual plan being executed online. So the speed of construction and bringing assets online, transmission and generation has been significantly slow, not only in Nebraska, but nationally. So that is a big assumption that has changed. Fourth, very, very important, since then, there have been significant discussions at a national level, and especially here in the region with the Southwest Power Pool, plan reserve margins. We started with a 12% planned reserve margin back in 2019 when we started doing this. That increased almost overnight to 15% 2 years ago, now to 16% for the summer, with a 36% going to 36% in the winter. That's still been debated and challenged at FERC, but that is a very, very clear change in resource adequacy, saying we need, the world that we knew back then is very different now. We need a lot more resources, especially in the winter, to maintain reliability of the grid. That compounded with performance-based accreditation policies that SPP is looking into, say your natural gas, your coal-fired power plant can't accredit the same as every other coal-fired power plant, because it really depends on whether or not you're putting the right amount of money and maintenance on that unit. Is that unit going to show up when we need it to show up? That was not part of the original study. That's the fourth. And the fifth one, which was part of the pathways to decarbonization, but I would say now it's taking an even a more front stage part of the discussion, is asset replacement. The age of our fleet at OPPD and nationally. I think that's something that is starting to become a more bigger issue. I'm not suggesting that was not studied or contemplated back then, but now, as we're seeing performance-based accreditation and the degradation of assets across the United States, that is becoming now another very important consideration. So going forward, I would expect this new IRP to consider all of these things, acknowledging that there will be other factors that we haven't begun to consider. But that, I think it was a fantastic study, Pathways to Decarbonization. It did a lot of really good work for us. It really set the stage going forward, and we can't take it off the shelf and repeat it, right? We have to completely modernize it and take into account the reality that we have today and figure out how do we move forward. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and I'll add a sixth. The load growth that we anticipated is not the load growth that we experienced.
Yes, that was obvious to me, but thank you for pointing that out. That's huge.
Waiting for him to add that.
I know, I'm like, wait, we're running down to 5 and he hasn't said load yet. Thank you. Thank you for that. I feel like it's really important to set that stage, that it's not the same study repeated over again. It has to be a new and different study that reflects our current state and our best projection for what the next 5 years can look like. And invariably we'll get something wrong, right? And so, plans are only on paper. We have to be able to execute something too. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's great. With respect to, I'll ask one more question. The IRP, we received a couple of comments around energy efficiency, DER. That's part of the modeling process for an IRP.
Yeah, we have that in our load forecasting, the adoption rates. Yep.
Okay.
As well as our future products and services that might influence.
Okay. Again, colleagues, any questions on the IRP process, just to make sure we're all clear on what it is, what it does, what our role is.
So following on Director Bogner's point, we talked about timeline, and the IRP sets an expectation for 5 years, but most of what we were discussing on the potential metrics was significantly longer than 5 years. And the challenge that was presented was that the lead time on steps necessary to achieve those outcomes is significantly longer. And so someone give me some information about how the IRP timeline of 5 years also translates to what to expect for actions necessary for things that will need to occur for something to happen 5 or 10 years after that. I mean, if we talk about a timeline like 2038, and we know that we need to take actions something like 10 years before that, well, that would be within the IRP timeline, but the outcome wouldn't be until significantly after the timeline. So how do those two align, that it's not a resource that might be online within 5 years, but steps would need to be taken within 5 years in order to get to something in the farther future?
You want to talk about how we go 5 to 10 years and beyond?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it really gets to the astute point that Director Bogner made, which is, when we do a plan, we inventory the totality of our circumstances at that time. And so our next IRP could be informed by significant policy changes across the country. So as an example, SPP has 15 gigawatts of GIAs that aren't built. So
Approved, but not built.
approved but not built. So I don't know who these people are, where they are, if they're not building their stuff. So does that get cleared out over the next year or two from a policy perspective? I'm optimistic that we're gonna try and deal with some of that stuff. What happens from a technology perspective? And so we try and look at that 5-year window because quite honestly, that's the amount of time we have the most certainty on, for I think relatively straightforward answers. We do talk about the longer term implications of the resource options that we have. And when things are made available in the future, how might they be deployed against the resources of today? And so that conversation tends to be a little more opaque because you're looking deeper into the duration curve. But Javier, I don't know, did you have thoughts on?
Just to add to that and to address your specific example, if we have an IRP that's published, let's say, end of 2026, early 2027, and we have significant changes that are happening in 2035 to 2040. And we know that some of the construction of either transmission or generation is gonna take at least through 2035 to 2040. My expectation would be that the IRP will, just like look with a telescope, right? It'll have a lot of clarity within the next 5 years, very specific exactly what's gonna happen. And then beyond 5 years, it'll start saying, we need to get ready, or perhaps we need to get approvals from the board in 2027 for a facility to be energized in 2038. If that is the timeline, that is part of what the IRP is going to include. The traditional way we've done IRPs basically said that within 5 years, 5 years was a good enough time. 5 years is not a good enough time anymore. Now, the modeling really can't give you that sense of accuracy at the 15th year or the 10th year, but I think that's something that needs to be taken into account. And we'll have those conversations, and we'll have an IRP that truly reflects not just the model, but the reality of load and our ability to energize and build new generation transmission. It has to have that lengthier.
Thanks, appreciate that.
So just to add a finer point, we don't model for just 5 years. We look further out. Farther you go, the certainty becomes less. So 5 years has been the standard in the past because you could build something in that space pretty easily. Things are changing, so it requires us to look a little different at that.
Good summary. Thank you, Troy. Other questions on the IRP? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I've talked about it in the committee. The constraints on, if you can just speak to again, constraints or viability of moving it this way a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Director Corp. So we've, this team, I think, has doubled over the last couple of years. We appreciate the resources the board, as president of the board, have given us. This team is heavily involved in facility evaluation right now. There's a lot of decisions that are being made on the resources that we've been bringing in as far as techno-economic evaluations. And so it pulls them away from some of those activities and it can make those things slower and less efficient and possibly less correct if we heap more on the plate. And so I think those were maybe where those conversations went, if I recall correctly.
This one, the other one is the cyclical nature of our budgets, right? You have the same people, a lot of the same people, team members are right now busy with budget forecasts or purchase power prices and market prices, load forecasts, etc. So you have to take that into account. It might be a very obvious way for me to say, hey, we don't have a team sitting idle waiting to get engaged. They're engaged, and we have to accommodate all of those different bodies of work. They are doing, I would say, and Brad and I have this conversation all the time, they are doing integrated resource planning every single day, right? That's their job. when they begin the official process and engaging with everyone in the organization, that's probably going to be at a point in time when Brad's team has the resources and they can schedule that. I am not ignoring the possibility that we may have to augment our resources. And just like we did last time when we had a E3 or a similar company to help us, that is also an option. But even that, you can't just outsource all of that work. It has to be, it's heavily consuming on our own staff. So you are already planning for a lot of that work next year.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just quickly, the IRP is scheduled for 2026. Does that mean the report comes out in 2026 or the work starts in 2026? I guess what I see, and from what we saw in closed session, is the demand for more resources is increasing. I don't see the workload on Brad's team getting any less in 2 years than it is now. So realistically, is that team going to be able to start this IRP at the end of 2025, or is it going to be pushed on further out?
Yeah, thank you for the thoughtful question. We're optimistic we're going to be able to start this and finish it on time, just like we've said. And if I become aware of something that compromises that, you'll be the first to hear about it, and we'll go from there. But I feel pretty good about it, but I appreciate the workload question.
Director Mohoff, and quickly just to address your question, the end of 2026 is when we're planning to start wrapping up the IRP. So the work begins in 2025, concluding close to the end of 2026. And I am being intentionally vague there because we have the option to file these with the Western Area Power Administration at early 2027, right? If anything comes and we have to finalize the actual report, we have a little bit of leeway there.
We had talked in systems that our intention was to file in 26.
Right.
Even though you're right, we do have the ability to do it in 27. So I maybe failed to communicate.
No, that's okay. I say it 3 times, right? I think the estimation is we start in mid to late 2025 and it's filed sometime towards the end of 2026. I think that's what you've said a few times. So that's the working assumption that I think we're under with respect to timing.
So related question on timing, the language in the updated policy language reflects future interim metrics to be informed by and determined following the completion of the 2026 IRP. We have on our side a biannual transition. Do we expect that the metrics would be presented and looked at an approval toward the end of 2026? Or would that wait into 2027? Because just like we will be going into 2025, there will be a transition of the people who are working on things. So I don't know if we want to try and discuss what we expect there. It seems like every other year now, rather than every year, we do run into the challenge of, did everybody who spent a lot of time on this on our side just leave? And so how do we envision that happening? And I guess maybe this is a question for staff or committee.
I thought about that a little bit. I think it's a great question. But I mean, I have to assume that if there's board work to be done with respect to the IRP, we'll go through the systems committee, right? Which if we're filing at end of 26 means that like that committee's work would then sort of wrap up in conjunction with filing it. And my assumption is that the IRP, again, like it says it in the SD right now, the IRP should help inform what the metric would then be. So I hope that it's like, there it is, just pull it out and plug it in. I hope our work is really focused on the IRP and less so on the 8 months that we've taken to do SD7 updates, right? Like hopefully that's not what it is.
Yeah, and I guess that's why I'm asking, is we've talked about a desire to not jump from one foot to the other on policy updates. But if we are currently studying language that says we expect a policy update after the 2026 IRP that projects something like the end of 2026, is that, I mean, are we clear on that being the anticipated, the IRP, most of the work will be done earlier, and then the finalization of the document will be toward the end of 2026. So we should be able to relatively easily draw out metrics for policy updates toward the end of 2026? Or are we looking at that would start at the beginning of 2027 with something like 8 more months?
I don't know why we would need an eight more months after a year plus of IRP work. Tell me if I'm wrong, but my expectation is the IRP should sort of spit out what we think what the metric should be.
It
right?
should.
What should we do by when?
I'm in full alignment. I think that's in my mind how it would work.
Yeah.
Knowing staff and knowing the board and the thoughtful discussions and debates we have, is it possible that we have debates and discussion in November of 26, December of 26, and we need further refinement that spills potentially into January or February? It is possible.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why we have the option of extending the filing deadline into early 27, but the intent would be to finish this up in 2026. There are many advantages, like you pointed out, continuity in committees. That would be very nice to have. At the same time, this is a very important piece of work that I'm guessing the board wouldn't want to rush or cut short because we have a predetermined specific deadline in December. So we will do everything in our power, and I think this is one where I would ask the team to go back and calendar everything and start scheduling things so that we have ample time for debate and discussion and wrap these up by the end of 2026, knowing that the board has the option to accelerate these or potentially delay it. But it should be around that same time.
Yeah, I would generally describe there might be a little bit of ambiguity going from one year to the next there, but I think we'll figure it out. I don't feel the need to like nail that down today. To your point, I would suggest we let the process unfold, and if we feel like it needs more time because we're all fighting about something because we're approving it now, then we want to allow for that time to unfold. And if the committees are going to roll over, I think so be it. My impression is that we will all be meaningfully engaged enough that there won't be a lot of friction going from one year to the next in that instance.
Okay, yeah, I guess I'm just looking to set expectations as we talk about committees that will be doing the 25 and 26 work, the systems committee and the people on the executive team will be working with that. And we generally understand that they're supposed to be running parallel, not we get to the end of the IRP and then initiate something new and different that leads to a policy update later.
Yep. I don't have concern about that.
Anybody else? Because I mean, 4 of us will be on that committee, and I guess from your side, systems,
I don't have any concern from that. I would be remiss if I didn't say, the concern is also on staff and continuity of staff.
Mm-hmm.
We are relying on very knowledgeable people who have been doing this for a long time, and I want to make sure that we continue to support them. Because the risk of losing key staff during this period, in my opinion, is potentially even more disruptive than the risk of switching committee membership. So I think that's super important for me, and I would ask the board to be supportive, to help, so that we can have that continuity. The work that Brad and his team are doing is incredibly important. One of the most important work streams that we have going on from strategic building out the company into the future. And I would be remiss if I didn't call out how important it is to have you and your team dedicated, really putting in the work. That to me is probably my biggest focus is from a continuity perspective, giving them the space, the support, the resources they need so that they can come out with a satisfactory work product at the end of this.
Appreciate the discussion there, because as you highlighted, we initiated the SD7 policy update focused on interim metrics, and now the language that's reflected in the policy we're considering approval of does not have metrics, but says the IRP will dictate future metrics. And so I'm very interested in what specifically are we expecting over the next roughly 2-year timeline.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks for the clarity, and I appreciate everybody's thoughtfulness on this.
Okay. Any final questions on IRP? Hearing none, we're back to the SD that's in front of you up there. You all have comments. You've all had time to consider. I've talked with a handful of you recently to try and understand, ultimately the question is this something that we're ready to carry forward for approval on Thursday? Or in essence, does it need to go back to committee for further refinement, discussion, deliberation, and eventual comeback? So I don't intend to call on each of you individually like I did last month, but at this point, if you've got thoughts on which course of action you would prefer we go, we would love to hear it now.
It's kind of gone on long enough. We've had a number of revisions and such.
Okay.
Appreciate the compromise statement, just move it back and forth cooperation. I appreciate that the interim metrics were removed from the final draft. Have some issues with bullet number 7, it's term environmental justice. I realize that's the buzzword of 24, thanks to the EPA, I guess, that term. Anyway, but I don't think politics should be included in our policies. I'm pretty sure we have existing policies that already prohibits discrimination in all forms. I'm not sure if that's necessary to be in this policy. It implies that we have some issues in the industry to do. The existing policy is obviously working, as we just heard a few minutes ago, with the strides we're making. This toward being carbon free is doing quite well, probably at a faster pace than I thought was possible. In any event, I will probably vote for the change because there was compromise made. I can live with it. But want to voice my concerns and it's all good.
Yep. So just to summarize, and we're not voting now, right?
We're going on Thursday, right?
If we go on Thursday, right? Yeah, I just don't want to run afoul of any.
No, I understand.
Yeah, but to summarize, you have general concerns with a few things about it, but generally speaking, you're happy to send it to vote on Thursday. Yep. Okay. Yep.
Thank you.
So,
Oh, Janice, go ahead.
so I guess given what we heard today in closed session and given that we will, until we get our 2 gas plants online and accredited, and there's, questions about that. I think waiting another while to get good data and good information about what's possible and feasible is prudent. And especially given the political climate of the day, it's important that our board show that we hear and understand that growth is expected and necessary for the state of Nebraska. And so I think that it's prudent to go through this IRP process and figure out what's feasible and to not stress our staff too much by dumping too much on their plate at one time. I think this is ready to go to a vote.
Okay, thank you, Janice.
Yes, thank you. Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank each person who sent emails and submitted comments regarding SD7. You all took the time and energy to formulate your thoughts and communicate with us, and your comments and concerns have made me uncomfortable in some cases, which was okay. This has helped me refine my thinking about the elements of SD7. Next, I want to address the sometimes stated perspective that the OPPD Board of Directors is trying to, quote, save the planet from the effects of human-caused climate disruption. Oh, would that we could. However, I disagree with that perspective. We are not trying to save the planet, but we feel a sense of obligation, I think, to do our part, to do what we can to make the situation better. And the idea that one should not do something to make the world better until a neighbor does their part first is not an ethic with which I was raised, nor do I believe or observe that it's an ethic that makes the world run more smoothly. I want to talk a minute about what I like about SD7. The end of that first paragraph. We understand that climate change is a significant issue that requires pragmatic solutions recognizing technology advancement, energy supply sufficiency, and climate resilience. We have a three-legged stool of lower rates, reliability, and environmental sustainability. And now we have a third leg that has three legs laminated together. Pragmatic solutions with technology advancement, energy sufficiency, and climate resilience. And I just think that's a splendid way to put that. And they are equally important to carbon emission reductions. I love the first bullet. Well, second bullet, I guess, strive to improve efficient use of raw materials. That's just keeping our own house in order, doing our part there. Harden critical infrastructure. Strive for an early majority posture when considering technology advancements when system planning. I think that's going to come back. We're gonna reflect on that after the IRP. And collecting data on our environmental performance. You know, I heard in some of the comments, if you don't measure it, it's not going to happen. Oh my goodness. OPPD measures every blessed thing. They measure things we have no idea that they're measuring, but we'll ask a question. We'll go, oh yeah, we got those measurements. So I don't think there's a real concern about that not happening. And then recognizing the importance of environmental justice. That is something I think we're going to grow into and learn more about that. I would also say that our current ways of asking for public input on things like transmission lines, I think that very much reflects that ethic. We don't put it that way, but we want people to tell us. We think that we're thinking about the line going here. Do you have a family graveyard in there? Have you discovered any archaeological sites there? You know, that's already kind of ingrained, I think, in OPPD's processes. I am opposed to setting metrics for SD7 now, because as I think our previous discussion has illustrated, as much as possible, they need to be part of a well thought out plan. You know, the rule carpenters use and seamstresses is measure twice, cut once. And failure to make such a plan, you know, I think can open OPPD to unreasonable risk on both the financial and human capital fronts, and perhaps others. I like making a plan that brings more than 8 good minds together to carefully consider a course of action that's chosen. And OPPD, as we know, has so much more to consider in such a plan than just CO2 reductions. Secondly, on the human capital side, currently OPPD's workers are extremely busy executing planned builds and expansions that have already been asked for and approved. We need to consider their well-being in any decisions that we make, and we need to guard against overwhelming them when they currently have plate after plate after plate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, coming down the conveyor line on them with really no end in sight. On a side note, as has been mentioned oft times, but OPPD's employees are a really classy bunch of people. Initially, I think OPPD did not step up real quickly to offer mutual aid services to victims of Hurricane Helena because of their huge and exhausting effort dealing with our own July 31st storm, and then everything that had to be cleaned up and managed after that. But the team, as I understand it, Mr. Bai can correct me if I'm wrong, the team that made up those mutual aid crews got together and said, hey, folks from Virginia came and helped us when we really needed it. We need to help them now. Very classy people. My third reason, I feel a little embarrassed to confess it. It's because if we set interim metrics now, a plan will be executed to meet it starting Friday morning. We vote that. And I don't like the how, the way in which it will be met. Now I know, board of directors, we're not supposed to be concerned about the how, ours is the what. However, I feel pretty certain that those who want interim metrics to be set to more quickly reduce CO2 now will not be pleased with the how that management will execute either. And so for those reasons, I'm going to vote that we approve this plan with the interim metrics being waiting on those until the IRP plan is executed. I am complete. Thank you.
Take it to them.
Yep.
Got it. Thank you. Any other comments?
I can go next. I agree with Mary. I think there's a lot of really lovely, good, improved language in this. I'm reluctant to ignore the requests from my constituents around interim metrics. And so the language as presented to me today is not something that I'm able to vote for on Thursday, but I don't want my inability to vote for it to hold up the vote overall.
Okay.
And so I think that's all I would add.
Yep. Thank you. That's great.
This is a strange position for me because on the one hand, I was very glad when we initiated the policy update discussion toward interim metrics, something I've long sought, and I still would support interim metrics included now prior to the IRP to help guide the outcomes that we get. So that is something I would that I do not want to ignore from the feedback we've received. But on the other hand, we also have language now that I think is critical to include. I do strongly support the updates that are listed here, specifically the environmental justice. And it seems as though additional time is unlikely to get us to a position where we have interim metrics submitted, even as much as I would still want to vote for them now. So I don't want to not move forward on the important language that we have in favor of waiting for something else that, again, from discussions last month and now it seems like won't get there. So I would be glad to vote for what we have now, even as much as I would still want the additional language at some time in the future.
Got it. Thank you. I said I wouldn't call on people, but Matt and Amanda, anything to say? If no, that's fine.
Yeah, I'll try here. So I would probably echo a lot of what's already been said first. Second, to acknowledge a lot of the feedback that we received. I guess I'd like to just put it out there. I had thought the IRP will help us plan for what's to come. And I didn't want interim metrics to get in the way of that. But I also want to pose the question of how are interim metrics getting in the way of that? Just so we can maybe have a discussion on that. And some of that might be reminding me of past discussions, but if I think a too aggressive interim metric gets in the way of that and is maybe not prudent and would be concerning to staff, but I guess I'd like to talk about if there's an interim metric that everyone is comfortable with, if that is useful towards this conversation. And I'll look to you to kind of say whether it is or not, but that's probably where I'm at is raising the question if we can utilize the IRP, but also have an interim metric that you all are comfortable with.
Mm-hmm. It was really interesting. So from that perspective, I think the one interim metric that I can summarize here that I, at least speaking with each one of you individually and then having been part of these group conversations, one interim metric that I think we all can agree on is reliability and affordability. And that as passionate as the board as a whole, unit of control, is around net zero carbon and really doing the right thing for the environment and lowering greenhouse gas emissions, what I'm hearing too is that the board acknowledges that it's not easy. If it were easy, we would have done it a long time ago. It's not without risk. And so the interim metric that I see very clear in front of us is it's that risk of if we move too fast in a certain way, we may not like the how. We may put reliability at risk or affordability at risk. Let's wait. Let's have a plan together. Let's talk about the solution that still moves us towards a sustainable operation eliminating greenhouse gases sounds fantastic. But let's do it in a way that still addresses the resource adequacy constraint that we have today, that still continues, enables us to provide electricity to existing and future customers, meet that load growth that we have without sacrificing, compromising reliability or resilience or affordability. I think that, to me, I appreciate I'm giving you probably a different answer, but that to me is the interim metric that I can hear all of us, generally speaking, coalescing. That is interim metric. That is our milepost that we need to keep an eye on. And as we engage in this thoughtful process with the IRP and have good feedback and contributions from not only the board but our stakeholders, we'll come out with a plan that addresses in the vast majority of these issues, so that when we have interim metrics on greenhouse gas reductions, we can do that with our eyes wide open or wider open, knowing what the solutions will likely be, how long is it going to take us, and then really what is that going to do to reliability, resilience, and affordability. That's how I think about that interim metric that I think we are agreeing on. Hopefully it wasn't that aligned, but it's.
Are you done?
Maybe. I'll try to be.
Yeah, I think I'm happy to move forward with what we have. I would like to articulate that around the public comments. I don't think that any of the interim metric requests are falling on deaf ears here, and I want to make that very clear. I think when we go into closed session, we always get the legal reminders of our duty of care and loyalty and our business judgment role. And we work with a lot more information than what is shared with the public around a lot of the policy debates that we have. And there are a lot of things that we can't make public yet that would compromise our ability to deliver on an interim metric between now and 2040. There's also not any work that we would be taking on in the next 2 years while we do the IRP that would essentially affect that. And so I think from a business judgment rule standpoint, it's very prudent to do the study, do the plan, do the stakeholder outreach, understand all of the things that we articulated earlier that have changed and how they affect a decarbonization strategy going forward. And then set an interim metric that we not only know that we can hit, but we also have a very clear path on how to get to, both from a financial standpoint as well as a technological feasibility standpoint. Anything that we do beyond that is just virtue signaling, as you stated at some point, and are just, I'll say, fictitious plans. And I would rather vote for something in an interim metric that I know that we can solidly hit and we have aggressive, specific plans on getting to. Otherwise, I think that we're being dishonest with our customers. That's it.
Thank you. I want to give you space. I'll also acknowledge that there's enough consensus towards taking it to Thursday that seems like that's kind of the clear path, but
No,
you said maybe you were done. So
yeah, thank you. Amanda kind of summed up how I feel. It's, I think even though it's been arduous, at times, thank you all for the work you've done on it. And I think regardless, it's clear the meaningful work that folks are doing. And I appreciate that, all you guys, and thank you all. So good.
Great, thank you. I've got just two things. One is, if you all want to pay attention to operating board or board operating principle number 11, don't let the desire for consensus paralyze board action. Vote on the matter and be okay with a split decision. We are practicing what we need to practice. That's really good governance, honestly. I'll also quickly add that a lot of us are feeling a sense of uncomfortableness right now. That's what compromise often feels like. right? You don't get everything that you want. You're reaching for this, you're reaching for that, and we got to find a place to land. I've been searching for 8 months now, trying to find a place for this thing. And it's admittedly temporary, and that's okay. We've got a big effort coming in front of us. The board has clearly stated that it wants to be meaningfully engaged in the IRP process, which I'm sure we will be. So I'm happy that we have something to move forward, and I look forward to the IRP, assuming it passes, but I look forward to the IRP giving us all the visibility we need so that we can make a better decision in a couple of years. Okay. I think that's ready for Thursday. Thank you for the conversation. I'm really proud of the way in which you've all engaged in it. And thanks to the team as well for working with us over the course of the last couple of months to get it to this point. Dr. Williams, I think that's the end of the systems committee report.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you everyone for that. Next on the agenda is other business. Confirmation of board agenda. So looking forward to Thursday. Are there any items here that we would like to remove from the consent agenda?
7 revision.
Sounds good.
Yeah, cool.
Any other items in the consent agenda we'd like to see move to discussion? Finance, we have traditionally, are we good on finance items?
I think so. If you all are good.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, so we talked about the SD7 policy update. Are we good with the SD7 monitoring report?
Staying on consent?
Yeah. I guess I'm anticipating public comments, so I'm trying to make sure that we facilitate recognizing that people want to provide input, and I'm not certain if the input desired is on the monitoring report for the last year, or if the input desired is on the action item for the policy update looking forward. So anybody have thoughts about how to make sure we are hearing from people appropriately? It's all about the policy update, then we already have that covered.
Yeah, that's a good question, Eric. I appreciate the sentiment and the focus on making sure we leave space for the public to provide comments. So I could see putting the monitor report on the agenda as well. And at least, I mean, we don't have to have a big conversation about it, but at least giving them the opportunity to come.
Sounds good. That will avoid comments on the consent agenda specific to one narrow down item within there. And when we tee it up on Thursday, we can clarify the past view and the forward view on where we're looking for comments, where we would appreciate comments at the time. Okay. So then both SD7 items to the discussion action list. All right, thanks everybody. Next, review of board work plan. Committee chairs, do we have updates to the board work plan?
Well, the CEO emergency succession plan, presuming that it'll be approved on Thursday on the consent agenda, will be marked as complete.
Yeah, same for 7.
And then the audit subcommittee charter as well will move to complete. We're doing really well here.
These are pending updates that we reflected differently. It's next month.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2 from Amanda.
Yes.
Additionally, what's listed as the ad hoc committee on market transformation. Javier and I have been working on that, and there's a breakdown of where the topics that were outlined to be covered in that potential discussion have been assigned to other committees. And so we talked about this. I guess that information will make sure everybody is clear as we look toward future committee work about that, but that we can remove as completed with delegation of those or assignment of those tasks to other committees. Anything else? So 3 items that we removed marked as completed for next month.
It's 4 because SD7.
Oh, I'm sorry, SD7 also.
Getting a little sparse up there.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
okay.
workshop will bring some.
Yeah,
bring some
that
meat.
should come, we should have.
We're getting ready to fill it right back up.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Scott, we got all 4? Yes. Perfect. Thank you.
Work's never ending.
Next item, new generation and transmission updates. Says Troy, but it looks like maybe not.
Cheryl McGuire. Cheryl, yeah, we'll have a few presenters come up to walk through the many different projects that are in motion. Brad's team and my team are kind of hooked at the hip right now, trying to work through all these items. So we'll start off with Cheryl to give an update on Standing Bear and Turtle Creek.
Good afternoon, Cheryl McGuire, Senior Director of Operations Support. So the agenda today is to give an update on Standing Bear Lake Station and Turtle Creek Station, solar facilities, energy storage, and then expansion at Cass County Station Units 3, 4, and 5, and then Turtle Creek Station Unit 3, and then Cass County Station 1 and 2 dual fuel. Go to the next slide. Whoops. Back one. Thank you. For the update of Standing Bear Lake Station and Turtle Creek Station, I just want to say that there's a lot of activity that's going on even since we put this slide together. It's a pretty recent slide, but I already have some updates to some of the data that's on here. But very excited to share that both sites are now beyond 95% site progress. There's fewer construction activities going on, and commissioning is now taking center stage with many systems commissioning, and then we'll move into full commissioning. Wardzilla is on site at Standing Bear, and Siemens is at Turtle Creek, and they are working through pre-commissioning activities at both those sites. All of the materials and equipment to energize the sites have been delivered, so that milestone has been met since this slide was put together. And then in early November, OPPD will be moving into the admin building and the warehouse, so we're very excited about that. Later on this month, we're expecting first fire on gas for Turtle Creek Unit 1, and then later that'll be followed with Unit 2 and the Standing Bear Lake Station engines in early November. And then I was able to conduct a walk down of the site just like a week and a half ago, and I was very pleased to see that a lot of the housekeeping activities have dramatically improved. I saw and heard from the OPPD teams that the Zachary team is executing on items that have been brought to their attention on punch list items in construction that they need to fix and remedy. So they have been very responsive. They have more support as far as leadership at both sites, which is exciting to see. And then also all three vendors are working really well together as one team. So Wardzilla, Siemens, and Zachary. And the project management team is working on some micro schedules for the three vendors, working with them. But basically the three vendors are working together to make sure that each group can work in the same space at the same time, as opposed to like Wardzilla doing pre-commissioning in the engine halls and not allowing Zachary to be in while they're conducting that. So having both vendors being able to work in the same space is really dramatically improved, progressing through activities. And then also I'd just like to really give recognition to the project management team and the operations team, because they are empowering the people to step up to leadership, even if their title doesn't say that they have a leadership role, but they're really driving the vendors to be working for quality progress. And as far as substantial completion, you know, as we move into commissioning, the whole purpose of commissioning is to be checking out systems and components and making sure that they're working as expected and as designed. So with any plant going through commissioning, just like these sites, so nothing new for these sites, issues are going to come up. The vendors are going to work through solutions as issues come up, and then we're keeping a close track of what issues are coming up, what solutions that they're proposing, and keeping track on how that may or may not affect the substantial completion schedule. But currently we're scheduled to complete substantial completion in Q4 24, so basically at the end of the year. But then again, you know, as issues arise, it might stay at where we're targeting, and it could slip a little bit into January.
So substantial completion and total completion, same thing?
So think about.
I can't consider 96%.
Right. So think about substantial completion is you more or less have the keys to run the generator. There's always a bunch of small things left over at the end. It may be grass. It may be, you know.
You can operate though.
You can operate. Right. So I think when you said substantial completion. Q4 2024, Standing Bear looks pretty good. Turtle Creek is likely slipped into Q1 of next year.
Correct, and that's kind of due to those micro schedules that the two vendors are working really hard on. So when you have dual fuel on a combustion turbine, the fuel oil is a little bit more complex to go through commissioning. So as they're laying out that schedule, that's why it's kind of looking like it might slip to the right.
Yeah, and Siemens and Wärtsilä, when they come in on their pre-commissioning, they're looking over everything. And they've found some cleanliness areas that they'd like to see taken care of before we actually start the units. And so some of that work is we'll be pushing out to Turtle Creek just a bit.
Nothing of significant concern from the last month, I suppose.
Not like a showstopper of a long lead time item or something like that. These are all kind of small stuff that's kind of pushed things out a little bit.
And since last update, just really pleased to see how Zachary is showing up at the two sites and bringing in more support for both those two sites for our project. So that was very nice to see.
Something that might be interesting for the public and for the board, you know, we talk about first fire, and that's really exciting, right? The engines have been turning. We're turning those engines already. They're moving to those slow and fast turns where it's electrically, we're moving them, we're testing them. The first fire will be now the source of power that will continue to turn those engines, but the engines are already there. That's where we're talking about 95% completion. It's really exciting to see or to think, because you can't see them. You can think about those engines are already starting to turn, where the motor is already alive. It doesn't have the permanent source of energy yet, but it's really, really important to know that that's happening right now.
Right, and first fire will be on gas first initially and then on fuel oil.
So in a non-construction related question, the SPP approval is not contingent on timing on the construction activity, correct?
Correct. That's based upon a study.
And, okay, and we expect that in Q1, what's the timeline on this?
So remember, just a quick update on Ben's not here, but Brad can probably chime in. We have interim approval to run those units. And so the minute they're ready to go, we can begin injecting power into the grid. What we're waiting for is a final interconnection approval. That's what we're waiting for Q1 of 2025. That may or may not necessitate additional transmission infrastructure construction. Every point of reference we get from SPP, phase 1, phase 2 have indicated no additional construction on top of what we've already constructed. So once we get that final report and confirming that there is no additional construction required, then that moves us into the final stage of the irrevocable generation connection. But those two are separate in some way. We'll have these engines, these two new power stations online, right, without having the final irrevocable interconnection. Right, that will come. That's the last piece, very, very important piece, and that's one of the milestones that we have, the stage gates that Cliff talked about.
Yes, that's where my question was going, is that the stage gate timeline is based on the SPP final GIA approval, not the energizing of the units. So, right?
Or both, actually. If you were to go back, the stage gate had two items. That first box, one was the SPP interconnection. The other one was the actual energization of those.
And does SPP have like a date when they're like, this is when we'll announce the results of the studies? Or is there any, I mean, is it just, it goes along until we hear, or do they have a timeline? When do they do this? Do they always do it on February 1st or something?
Yeah, there's, so there's three paths. You have to build the generator, it has to run. Then you have to get the GIA results, and then you have to get the firm network service. We already got the firm network service, so that's a big check mark. He's gonna finish the generators, or him and his vendors. And then the GIA results are expected in early 2025. Every so often that will shift on us. We've talked about that. It's largely due to the large volume of resources, but there's no material update beyond what we've shared previously.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I assume someone will be calling every single day. When is it coming? Today? Today? Squeaky wheels and all.
Comments or questions? Pass it on to Carol Wozak for solar update.
Carol is our manager of renewable generation, as many of you may recall, specializes in solar, wind, and storage. So.
Good afternoon, Carol Wozak, Manager of Renewable Energy Resources. I'll give you an update on solar projects. So the first project I want to talk about is the Pierce County Energy Center. So this is a solar project we just announced last month. So it is a 420 megawatt solar and 170 megawatts of battery storage located in Pierce County, Nebraska. This is a unique partnership between Google and OPPD with NextEra as the developer of this project. There are some items that, the contract is contingent upon, including the generation interconnection agreement study and results of that, as well as that firm network transmission service that we just talked about. So construction has started on this project, just very early stages, last month, and expected commercial operation date will be in 2027. The next solar project to talk about is the K Junction Solar Project. So this is located in York County, Nebraska, near the village of McCool Junction. We are continuing to work with the county on regulations in this area. We're continuing with our community engagement to work through that piece of it, as well as continue our efforts with MPPD on the timeline related to the transmission upgrades with this facility. So this does have an executed generation interconnection agreement. I'm just working through the planning and zoning process at this time. So next will be the energy storage update. So from the near-term generation resource plan, we had listed approximately 125 megawatts of energy storage at 4 hours equivalent. So the Pierce County Energy Center materially satisfies the required storage volumes in SD9, but we are continuing to move forward to do our feasibility study at North Omaha. So we did kick off a feasibility study looking at North Omaha for location, estimated site preparation, site layout of the equipment, and budgetary estimates for that to go along with the retire replacement process. So we'll continue with that with expected results in Q4 2024.
Quickly, just Carol, I didn't want to interrupt on the interconnection considerations. That's important. We just talked about interconnections and SPP and queues. North Omaha units 1, 2, and 3 will cease to operate sometime in 2026. We have an generation interconnection right there at that site for all those megawatts. So very, very important for us to study and analyze and see what do we do with that? How do we keep it, modify it, reduce it? It's an asset that it's an important consideration as we look at energy storage and especially other uses in that site. What the infrastructure that is already there serving and interconnecting in North Omaha is important, not only the physical infrastructure, but the actual interconnection. And so it's something that we're taking seriously, and that's why we continue to do the feasibility study to see what can we do with that interconnection? How can we best use that interconnection if it's feasible, space-wise, cost-wise, etc. So just a good reminder, since you talked about the interconnection, how important that is. That's importance of that site.
Feasibility study says Q4 2024. Am I reading that right?
Yes, sir.
So like within a couple weeks.
Yes, sir.
Just making sure I'm understanding. Like, I don't remember that timeline being displayed before, so I appreciate it, and thanks for the clarity and when that will be done. Glad to hear it. Thanks.
Can I ask a question on the study? So I'm looking at the bullets and thinking about North Omaha and the surrounding community and some information that kind of goes up into the world about batteries and risks and fires and impacts on community. Is that part of what we're doing as the feasibility study as well?
Yes.
Yeah, we're looking at all the risks associated with that as part of feasibility.
Great, thank you.
Greg, I got a great list on safety related to energy storage systems. I'll send you.
Okay.
Director's ongoing education.
Sweet.
Any questions for me? Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Jake.
Next, we have Jake Blair, Manager of Thermal Energy Resources. And so Jake will give an update on Cass County 3, 4, and 5 and Turtle Creek 3. These are 4 new engines to support the growth the community's asking for.
Good afternoon. I'm Jake Blair, Manager of Thermal Energy Resources. Take you back through some quick history from before. We, coming out of the resolution, we discussed the choice of 900 megawatts total for new generation assets. And we selected Siemens for a total of 900 megawatts, each one being 225. The site selection, we've walked through this previously, but we'll be placing 1 CT at the Turtle Creek site and 3 more at the Cass County site. We've recently been able to submit the air permit. So our ERA team's been working through that with the NDEE. And we're currently have reviewed the responses and completed a review of the request for qualifications from EPC contractors. That's engineering, procurement, and construction. And so right now we're advancing to secure an EPC contractor at this time, and we anticipate that to be completed by the end of 2024. All right, next slide. So walk you through some updates on the Cass County dual fuel conversion. Coming out of the board resolution as well, this Cass County dual fuel conversion will commit 324 megawatts of energy. We've executed a dual fuel retrofit contract with Siemens Energy for this equipment and services. We've also submitted the air permit for this site for Cass County, and we're currently working through the same efforts as the previous slide to advance with securing an EPC contractor this time. So same anticipated date for that, which is the end of 2024. That's currently the updates on the new generation for the district. Any questions?
So at the risk of being obvious here, the differences here is Turtle Creek Station and Standing Bear Lake Station combined 600 megawatts. Complex because both of them are new stations, brand new stations, with all the complexities that involve with paving roads, and it's a brand new station. These 4 units are very complex too, and I don't want to detract from the complexity here. This is 900 megawatts. So 50% more megawatts than the 2 power stations that we're completing now combined. Now the blessing here is that we will put those turbines in existing power stations. So there's a little bit less complexity in new siting, et cetera, but significantly more complex in the number of megawatts, dual fuel, and you're going to be working around an existing power plant. So that brings up a whole set of complexities that the new power plants didn't have, right? So just very, very grateful for all the planning that goes ahead of time, because once we go in, we're going to be operating 2 power plants as we're building literally right next to those units.
Do we have to wait on a GIA for any of these new units?
Yeah, thank you for the question. There's 2 legacy GIAs from Power with Purpose, and there's 2 new ones, I believe. Someone can hop on or message me, correct me, but so a little bit of a mixed bag, some of both.
But we're applying our lessons learned on GIA timeframe and incorporating that into our schedule.
So you should have 2 of them here and Q1 of next year. So half of new.
Yes.
So if you didn't hear these, Director Molhoff, it's the same, I'm going to call it the same batch of generation connection applications that we submitted that we're waiting for Turtle Creek Station and Standing Bear Lake Station. It's the same vintage that we're using some of those applications for these new units. So we're taking advantage of those applications we put in a few years ago. We should get them here in the next few months. And then there's 2 more that are more recent. We believe that the time frame here will provide ample room for those generation connections to come in.
I want to thank Dan real quick. That was correct. 2 are from 2020 Power with Purpose, and 2 were more recently dropped in 2023. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Great. At the end of our agenda, before we adjourn, we will take comments from the public on items of district business. Comments made by all parties during the meeting are part of our official public record. Comments in the room first, then via WebEx. Do we have any in-person attendees? Great. For WebEx attendees, if you wish to make a comment, please send the meeting host a message using the chat feature or utilize hand raise feature. Detailed instructions can be found on the OPPD website, link shown on the screen. When I call on a member of the public speak, please affirm that we can hear you before commencing with your comments. Please state your name, address, and the name of any organization or person you represent. Each individual will be allotted 3 minutes per matter pending. To assist you, we'll use the timer on screen and signal when you have 30 seconds remaining, as well as when time is up. If you have written materials, please send them to corporatesecretary@oppd.com. It will be received on our behalf. For all attendees, please direct your comments to me. We'll either respond to you directly or defer responses to another member, board member, or officer of the district. Board values and welcomes civil, respectful, clear, and concise communication from the public. During public comments, speakers should refrain from repetitious, profane, or irrelevant comments. Speakers shall refrain from pulling the board, as such vote is not on the agenda and prohibited by law. We do not have any public comments in the room. We have members online to provide public comments.
And Winston.
Hello, Ken, are you there? Hello, Ken.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. We all thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, I was uncertain. Thank you, Director Williams and members of the OPPD board. I wanted to start by just saying that offering congratulations on all the renewable energy that's being put online. I think that's really the announcements that have been made in the last month are really significant, and just wanted to offer my congratulations on that. Oh, I should have indicated I'm speaking on behalf of the Nebraska Sierra Club and the Nebraska Interfaith Power and Light. Thank you for including environmental justice in the draft of SD7. This is something that's long overdue. There are aspects of generating and distributing electric power and the causes and effects of climate change, which have disproportionately negative impacts on certain communities. OPPD's own maps demonstrate this. The community with the greatest energy burden is the North Omaha area, which is also the community with the largest number of environmental health hazards, including the emissions from the North Omaha coal plant and the corresponding health impacts on members of that community. However, we would strongly disagree with the proposal to strike customer energy efficiency from SD7. We understand their plans to put energy efficiency in the economic development strategic directive. Although efficiency has economic development benefits, we believe belongs in the effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and should be included in SD7. One way for OPPD to address environmental justice issues would be by including customer energy efficiency as part of SD7. As noted by a testimony provided by the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, energy efficiency and environmental justice go hand in hand because of the higher burdens of that disadvantaged communities experience. OPPD can further environmental justice by investing in low-income energy efficiency programs to relieve high energy burdens, which simultaneously result in healthier and more resilient homes. We join MEEA in calling for goals for measuring energy burden reduction that demonstrate both emissions reductions and progress in alleviating energy burdens on low-income customers. We also believe that customer generation should be included as part of SD7. Some experts believe that customer generation can provide 10% or more of the energy needed to meet customer demand. We also support interim goals, but I think that train has left the station. So I'll just make that statement for the record that we would support an 80% net reduction by 2038. Meeting these goals is very important to address the existential threat of climate change The board should never lose track of this. And we also would just, if I could just conclude with my final statement, the vast majority of public comments provided rational statements in support of rational environmental justice and interim goals. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board.
Thank you for your comments. Are there additional public comments online?
David Corbin.
Hello, David, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Okay. David Corbin, 1002 North 49th Street, speaking on behalf of the Missouri Valley Group Sierra Club. I'd like to start with SD 13. The outreach program looks good. I hope that this IAP2 guidelines that you referenced are followed and that progress is reported back on how well you're doing. I particularly like the citizen advisory committees, the consensus building, participatory decision-making, citizen juries, ballots, and delegated decisions. Just like the Greener Together voting process. I wanted to just point out the Youth Climate Summit happened on October 4th, and there were over 200 students. Locally, Students for Sustainability should be one of the groups that are part of your outreach. There is also talk of launching a Green Equity Nebraska group. Once again, I encourage OPPD to use already established organizations to assist in outreach, such as OPPD's, as I referenced earlier, Greener Together program. The Sierra Club's virtual solar tour of Greater Omaha also includes OPPD's community solar and the service building by the airport and the Greener Together solar projects. This was part of the national solar tour that's still up online and available. And it's the only Nebraska tour that is listed on the National Solar Tour. But the effort is to try to let people know that solar is out there and how it works. I saw reference to the IRA. I didn't necessarily see reference to NDE's grant and to outreach. Perhaps I hope that you've already done to their new interim director, and especially with their large grant. The IRP that you spent a lot of time talking about also opens to public comment, in which OPPD will likely hear the same comments that you just ignored in SD7 deliberations. So it's basically saying we want input, and then we're going to wait for another process in which we will get input, which will likely be the same. One final thing, and that is I had a new heat pump installed, and I was surprised, and maybe at some later point you can tell me, I was surprised that the new meter wasn't a smart meter. It would make sense to me that any new meters should be smart meters that you move in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there additional comments online? Great. With no more comments, that concludes our agenda. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.